The Goal of Life or Science and Revelation, by H. E. Butler, author of 7 Creative Principles, Solar Biology, Narrow Way of Attainment, Practical Methods, et al. Brought to you by Masonic Audiobook Library, read by Kwame Agyare. Chapter I. Development. The beginnings of organized life act from instinct without brain power to define and guide the impulse. The insect moves about apparently without aim, a little way in one direction, and back, then in another. Universal life runs it in accordance with its form and quality, as the water runs the water wheel. But as experience is gathered from hunger, meeting enemies, and the general struggle for existence, brain powers begin to develop, and with the development of the brain, the general nervous structure develops and refines. In this way, universal mind takes the elements of the earth and organizes for itself a body through which to find expression, through which to carry forward a line of growth toward the fullness of manhood. In its early history, the race was largely dominated by instincts, because it was without sufficient brainpower correctly to define the mental impulses from the cause side. It was not until a comparatively advanced stage of racial progress that the higher light of intuition appeared. Because mind always turns toward its source, consciousness toward its origin, man has always been a religious being. But before the reasoning faculties were sufficiently developed to have an intelligent recognition of the impulses of the universal mind, his religion was as immature as his mentality, and he worshipped the sun, moon, and stars, and images of his own ideals. During this period, the intellect was slowly unfolding, and as an aid to its growth, revelation, in the external types and shadows of its manifestation, was given to the people as they could receive it, for it was in this form that the earlier revelations came to the race. It is a law that thought suggested to the mind, though not understood, much less comprehended, builds itself into the organism, so that when the building is complete the meaning of the thought is grasped. Therefore revelation came first in types and shadows, the external form of the vital energy that was within. Added revelation was given as fast as the race developed sufficiently to receive it, but the vital reality was always represented by some material symbol, and in the effort to interpret the revelation gross errors crept in. In addition to this, there were other fruitful sources of error. Being largely under the control of the instincts, the people were exceedingly superstitious. Every manifestation of the incomprehensible, the grand, or the sublime, was to them always through the direct intervention of some unseen being. Thus, in addition to the nature forces, a multiplicity of gods took form in the popular mind, and the pantheons of the different nations came into existence. Again, the inclination of the human mind to seek cause readily developed into a search for magic power. There has always been a power entirely incomprehensible in the human will, a fact which led the earlier nations into ceremonial magic, the black arts, and all the equipments of a religious and superstitious mind. But the coming of the Christ to earth lifted the race above this dark cloud of superstition, for it is universally admitted that the Christian religion lies at the foundation of the height and glory of our civilization. Nevertheless, as the records of the past show that there was an apparently darkened mental condition of the world at the time of the revelation of our Bible, and because the mind of the day is turned almost exclusively toward the scientific investigation of the laws of nature, those mental states that led the race into the light of revelation seem crude and repulsive. The present trend of the mentality is to turn altogether from intuition and to depend wholly upon the reasoning brain. A study of the record of racial experience during the centuries of the past, especially of the nations immediately allied to our own, and the present scientific investigation of a most materialistic character, complete the education given in our colleges and to our clergy. Ever is held up that frightful effigy of the darkened mind of the past as a warning against credulity and superstition. This effigy has intensified a materialistic mentality and has caused the educated classes to fear even to admit to their own souls the possibility of revelation or the active principle of intuition. They have practically shut out everything that savors in the slightest degree of a manifestation of spiritual activity, and, consequently, spiritual inspiration and added revelation are no longer possible. The terms inspiration and revelation have been misapplied, and therefore need definition. Inspiration bears to revelation the relation of cause to effect. Inspiration is not necessarily the act of a human agent becoming a medium of expression for a being in the spirit world, but it is a well-known phenomenon of everyday life. The act of recalling a thought we call recollection. That is, we have had an experience and have forgotten it. A suggestion, page 5, comes to our mind of something concerning this experience and we wish to recall it. The mind is at once concentrated upon the desired thought. Every other thought intruding itself is repelled, and the mind, held in the attitude of desiring, reaching out for one definite thought, draws in, inspires, the refined substance generated in the body and expressed through the brain at the time of the experience. This wonderful formative principle, active in all growth throughout the world, has its highest manifestation in the brain of man. And the subtle elements, generated in the body by past experience of thinking, are called again into the brain, recollected, and they are remembered. Every part of the occurrence is put together again, member to member, and the experience in all its original form and power stands out before the consciousness which recognizes that which is past. In like manner, when the heart is sad from a sense of something to be known which is not known, the same faculty is called into activity and reaches out into the realm of universal mind to gather that which is desired. The sadness of the heart produces a negative state in the inner consciousness and intensifies desire. Under such circumstances, the individual gathers from the unknown, and otherwise unknowable, the knowledge of which the soul feels the need. The knowledge thus inspired, when formed in the mind, becoming a vivid realization, is a phase of revelation. Still another form of revelation is that received when God sees that a man needs knowledge of something of importance to himself or to the race. Under such circumstances, the inner attitude obtaining in the mind, angels from the world of souls are frequently sent to him with messages of truth and wisdom. But in order to receive the message, the man, as the great teacher said, must become as a little child. He must realize that he does not know and earnestly desire to know. Because of this fact, revelation from the spirit world is always preceded by a condition which breaks down the selfish mentality, and produces in the individual an earnest, childlike desire to know and to do the right. This destroys, for the time being, all preconceived ideas, enabling the mind to be receptive and to listen. Then the messenger who is sent from on high, all unknown to the individual, draws near and unites his mentality with the mentality of the one to whom he is sent, thus causing him to know even as the messenger knows. Therefore, in place of a command from a controlling mind, a loving unity is formed for the time, and the man is treated as a friend of God. But fear of every kind, even fear of error, fear of what people may say, an undue appreciation of one's own mental capacity, a disposition to criticize page 7 anything that may not agree with preconceived ideas, everything not in accordance with the thought of the messenger tends to repel him and to reject his message. The education of the present day is such that even the most devout and earnest are afraid to receive revelation from God, and therefore the door is practically closed between God in the spirit world and man in the material world. There are barriers set up against everything except physical experience, and, consequently, new and added revelation of spiritual truth cannot be received. Not only is the trained mind barred in every direction except in the direction of physical experience, but even here it must specialize, that is, restrict itself to a particular line of a very limited department of investigation. Thus the person atrophies by disuse every faculty of even the external mind, except those necessary to the very narrow line of activities to which he is confined. To those familiar with the faculties of our great universities, the effect of this most absolute sacrifice of the individual to the cause of popular education is very evident. The broader intellectual interests are closed to its members, and, except in the department of their own work, they are to a decided degree mentally incapacitated. One can look into their faces and almost tell the line of specialization each has chosen. Not only do our leading educators, but the majority of the men who led in the research of the time, sacrifice themselves to the advancement of science. But it is well known that if a man is to attain marked success in any direction, he must focalize his whole mind upon that subject. Results are reached in this way that can be obtained in no other. The Cyclopean eye figures a reality of life referred to by our Lord when he said, "If thine eye be single, thy whole body shall be full of light." Matt. v. 22. For purposes of concentration upon one subject, the physical eyes and the eyes of the mind become one, physically upon the book before you, mentally upon the thought under consideration. And when concentration is upon material things, the eye sees nothing else. The Cyclopean eye of today has its development in the specialization of the intellectual world. Therefore, the education of modern times, conforming the mind as it does to its present channels, is in itself necessary and good, notwithstanding the fact that it narrows the range of the intellectual vision. A phenomenon of mind, before referred to, is that inspiration takes place when the entire attention is focalized upon one subject to the exclusion of every other. But in order to obtain this condition of concentration, it is necessary to repel, which is a combative attitude, every thought but the one sought. In our educational institutions we find this necessary repulsion carried to an extreme of an intolerance which condemns and rules out the higher faculties of the human mind, the faculties that lie at the very root, the foundation of consciousness, and with them is excluded the spirit of devotion or recognition of God. The accepted training of the mind is good in that it teaches the use of the perceptive faculties, to formulate orderly thought in regard to observable facts of physical nature, and gives control of the external mentality, but, sad to say, the present methods array the entire consciousness against God, the Spirit, and destroy the ability to reason from cause to effect, training the mind to reason exclusively from effect to cause, while, strange contradiction, cause is at the same time ignored. Some of our able men have noted the fact that it takes but a year or two in our theological institutions to eradicate the habit of religious devotion, and in its place to imbue the mind with the spirit of infidelity to one's own highest attributes of mind and soul consciousness, and infidelity in regard to the validity of Bible revelation. If this is the course of instruction given by religious teachers, is it surprising that the religion of Christ is at such a low ebb in the world today? The vital thought currents of the race are despised, condemned and repelled, and only those faculties recognized which have unfolded through the struggle of animal existence from its lowest form up to the present highly developed animal part of human nature. Then we are asked, if the things of which we are about to write are true, why have they not been known before? The reason is obvious in the fact that we, as civilized nations, have been working so diligently to close the door to all approaches from the cause side. These conditions have grown out of fear, perhaps justifiable fear. For, in the absence of a mind that has surveyed the whole road and is capable of grasping the problem of life and putting in order before the people the broader outlines of truth, the great scheme of growth and development, the prevailing materialistic intolerance has been the protection against the grossest superstition and error. Under existing circumstances, the best thing possible has been done. Throughout can be traced the general plan of the great creative mind that formed the world and man upon it. It is a well-known fact that a man can do but one piece of work at a time. Therefore the Creator, or, if you please, the creative forces working in the growth of the different races in different periods of the world's history, developed the first consciousness of the unseen and cause world. But, as we have said, the incapacity of the brain correctly to interpret causation made it necessary to take the race into the external activities, and round out to completeness the capacities of the gray matter in its relation to the physical world. These capacities have been developed and do not the time, the stage of development, or the need of the people, cause the crying demand of the day for other and higher revelation. A demand that we go back, pick up, and carry forward that faculty of instinct that lies at the very foundation of our being, that we take hold upon it by the matured brain power, and develop in the race the intuitional power that will enable man to become more like his Creator, with a right hand to grasp the material universe and its workings and a left hand to grasp the spiritual forces and laws of causation, and thus blend his spiritual nature into a well-rounded and complete manhood. End of Chapter 1 of The Goal of Life, brought to you by Masonic Audiobook Library. Footnotes. As the terms instinct and intuition have been confused, it may be well to state briefly their relative meanings. Instinct is the impulse produced upon an organism by the universal mind. It becomes intuition when the brain power is sufficiently unfolded correctly to understand and define the thought embodied in the impulse, and the use to be served by the act which is the result of the impulse. The Goal of Life or Science and Revelation. By H. E. Butler. Brought to you by Masonic Audiobook Library, read by Kwame Agyare. Chapter 2. The Existence of Higher Faculties. Man in his developing has become overbalanced in the direction of the reasoning faculties, and, as suggested in the preceding chapter, the harmony of a well-rounded maturity demands that the intuitional faculties be understood and given their full function. As intelligent, thinking beings, we find ourselves here with but a vague idea of how we came to be here, or of what forces projected us into being, and with less idea of the origin of conscious intelligence. In order to obtain a knowledge of such truths, we must have an adequate conception of the immensity of the universe and of its eternal duration, and a realization that we are integral parts of the universe, integral parts of something we have discerned faintly, and vaguely defined as law, nature. In the dark ages of human intelligence, when it was illuminated only from its source, this something about which so little is known was called God, a term which expressed the idea of power only, almighty, all-comprehensive power. From this very early phase of human experience, page 13, have come two modes of thought and action. The reasoning mentality and the intuitional mind had their beginning in this period. That intuitional mind has been termed the subjective mind, and, in the religious cults of the past, it has been mystically known as the mind of the soul, and the inquiry as to what the soul is, has brought out many answers to uncertain and unsatisfactory to the mind analytic in its tendencies. The nearest approach to a satisfactory definition is that it is the thinking part of man's nature, which is as far from satisfactory as it is inadequate as a definition. If we accept the Bible revelation that God created the world and all that is in it by a word, then we must accept as a fact also that we were created by that word. This, at least, suggests the thought that we are but a part of the universal mind, having been organized and given limitations that we term the individual consciousness. These limitations may be called the ego, and that which is limited, the soul. For illustration, if we take an airtight vessel and seal it up so that no air can get in or out, then the air originally in the vessel will remain, no matter where the vessel may be carried, even though it is forced into the depths of the ocean. It is so with the original consciousness of man's existence. It is part of the all-mind, and through the organization, it has been shut in and given limitations, and these limitations are determined by the uses arising in the necessity for maintenance of its individualized existence. This fact makes it evident that the stronger the ego, the narrower are the limitations of the individual. It follows, therefore, that in the developing and in the expanding of the individual, there need be an overcoming of self-love and the eradication of too much self-appreciation, in order that the consciousness may become receptive to the fountains from which it draws its existence. We agree, therefore, in the assertion that individuality is such as an organized condition of life, and we agree also in the belief that life did not originate with us nor with our ancestors. This being true and life being the source of our consciousness, the possibility of opening up the limitations of the ego is again suggested to the mind, thus giving free access to the inflow of the universal life. Special methods bearing directly upon this subject characterize all the teachings of Jesus of Nazareth. Nevertheless, the experiences of the past and of many persons at the present time demonstrate the fact that this letting go of the strength of the ego, and being passive to the inflow of universal life, have been destructive to the individuality. Notable among such instances is the spiritualistic medium who becomes passive and receptive to whatever may flow in. As a matter of fact, there flows into such a person just what he or she believes. And as these people believe in the existence of spirits, disincarnate souls, therefore individualities or thought forms, dark and malicious characteristics of their own lower natures, flow in and possess them, and, as Christ said, the last state of these people is worse than the first. Again, we have all seen the religious devotee who, without a knowledge of God or of universal law, has relinquished the ego to a certain extent and, opening himself to the universal mind, has become fanatical even to the loss of his individuality, insane. The reasoning intelligence has taken such examples as a warning against opening the selfhood to the universal mind. Just here, however, we meet a law of mind so well known as to have escaped critical inquiry, which is explained in what follows. In the preceding chapter, we referred to the law of inspiration, that we draw in, inspire, whatever the mind is centered upon to the exclusion of all else, and that the wonderful formative principle dominating human consciousness at once makes an image, a thought form, of that which is indrawn. But in the process the principle of discrimination is called into action, a principle which in vegetable life, being nearest the creative source and therefore purest in character, expresses itself most perfectly. When a seed is placed in the ground, the chemist, knowing the properties of the original plant, is able to predict with absolute certainty what chemical elements the growing seed will gather to itself out of which to build a like organism. The same principle, finding expression in the human consciousness, is taken control of by the organized mentality and may be suspended in its action, directed in its course, or intensified in its operation, and thus, being under the control of the individual, produces manifold results. Therefore, as soon as the individual, by means of the concentration previously noted, opens himself to the inflow of universal life, we shall see further on, that life and mind are synonymous terms, that in which he believes flows in and its image takes form in the mind and becomes for the time his consciousness. It has been demonstrated that a person believing in a certain deranged and consequently diseased condition of the body, actually produces this condition, and there have been instances in which the physical body has been destroyed by this means. Belief is an all-powerful factor in human life, and for this reason, the necessity is imperative that the reasoning mind, or, if you please, the guiding intelligence derived from experience, take control of the activities of the inner life and consciousness. When there exists correct knowledge of the workings of the intuitional faculties, and the individual is able to take control of this function, then it will be found that these higher faculties are the dominant faculties of the real self, that they are that part of man's nature which, even in the absence of conscious thought, knows that he exists and needs only an impulse of desire to call in from the universal mind unformed thought elements. These unformed thought elements, when carried to the reasoning brain, give it to know, both by inductive and deductive methods, that which is beyond the ken of the mere reasoning mind or the mere instinctive action. From the foregoing, we may reasonably conclude that the higher faculties, now dormant in the race, may be brought into activity at will, and the consciousness allied to all that is in the universal mind, and that thus the individual may select therefrom whatever is needed. We think, therefore, it has been made clear that in the evolvement of the individual by means of the inflow of qualities of the universal mind there are active three factors. First, the principle of inspiration, which draws in, causes to flow in, the qualities of universal life, where all qualities exist. Second, the formative principle of human intelligence, is so perfect in its workings, that any quality that is indrawn is at once put into its proper form according to its specific quality. Third, belief, which underlies these two principles and controls the result of their activity, determines the character or quality of the life inspired and consequently decides what form it takes in the individual consciousness. Therefore, belief decides the character of intuition. From what has been said, the thinking mind will find suggestions which answer the question as to why such monstrous errors, superstitions, and evil results of every kind have overtaken those who have depended exclusively upon the inner consciousness, the instinctive mentality. Because of the facts just presented, the great religious teachers of the immediate past have emphasized the necessity of the reasoning mind, of them knowing. We read in Hosea IV 6, "My people are destroyed for lack of knowledge," and also the words of the Lord Christ, John v. 32. "Ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free, free from those dangers that have beset the race from the beginning to the present time." But since belief, as we have seen, controls the inspiratory and formative principles of the individual life, we have reached a point in the growth of the race where mind, the reasoning mind, must discover certain general principles of absolute truth in order that the faculties of inspiration and intuition may be safely used, or, in the language of the ancient mystics, in order that the individual may go out into the realm of the universal mind, discover and obtain knowledge that the advancing needs of the people are beginning to demand. With this thought in mind, we shall endeavor in the following pages to expand our idea of human origin, of organized intelligence, of the fountains of life, and the oneness of God, the cause of all. We shall suggest methods also by which we may gather and incorporate within us a greater amount of the universal life, methods by which that life may be refined, sensitized, and intensified, thus giving it enormous added capacity, and methods that will give assurance of the correctness of the process from its beginning through each step of its course. End of Chapter 2. Next. Chapter 3. Reason and Religion. Chapter 3. Reason and Religion. In considering the underlying and causative principles governing the two factors that give power, the one, the reason, or the intellect, and the other, the sentiment that we call religion, we necessarily enter an unknown realm, for mind must study its cause. The stream must rise to its fountain. Therefore, in order to study the causes underlying mental phenomena, we must reach out and inspire from the fountains of mind. We read that when Jesus was speaking to the people of his day who failed to understand the meaning of his words, he said to them, "He that is of God heareth God's words. Ye therefore hear them not, because ye are not of God." John v. 47. He here intimated the possibility of touching a sphere of mind lying beyond that which is normal to the human faculties. And, after all these centuries of the growth and the development of the race and of the influence of the Christian religion, have we not a right to believe that there is a large body of men and women in the world that have incorporated within themselves a quality of mind transcendently above the mere human mind, or, shall we say, the animal mind? In view of these facts, we shall attempt to search into some of the fountains from which come those faculties culminating in what we term reason and religion. Because the realm is an unexplored one and there are no ready-made terms in which to express the thought, we ask our readers to help us by studying themselves introspectively. To begin with the investigation of the reasoning faculties. Why is it that you cannot always use these faculties with equal facility? There are times when, strive as you may to reason out a problem, the mind does not seem to be in tune for its work. Under such circumstances, we ask you to turn within and carefully to seek the cause there. Do you not find that there is some disturbance of the vital currents? Can you reason to advantage when there are inharmonies and combative conditions that you are compelled to meet? Combativeness and anger confuse the mind and prevent clear, logical reasoning. On the other hand, when surrounded by loving friends, kind thoughts, genial associations, Your mind works freely and there is no trouble to reason clearly, positively, and correctly. Does not this at least suggest that there is something behind the phenomenon of what we call the reasoning mind? The sick man is not capable of deep reasoning. The man engaged in research and deep thought finds it necessary to keep the life currents, the health and vigor of the body, in the best condition in order to do his best work. Another suggestive fact is that intense concentration of thought and close reasoning exhaust the body even more rapidly than physical labor. The thought seems to partake of and to use up the life of the body, suggesting that, in some way, mind is directly connected with life. Let us inquire into how we think, not into the methods applied to bring thought into form, but into that which precedes, the means by which we approach those activities which produce the actual thought. There is first a desire and a will to do, followed by the turning of the mind and the centralizing of it upon the subject that we wish to consider. The question here arises as to what is meant when we say that we have turned the mind to the consideration of a subject. Does it not mean that we have turned the consciousness in a given direction? And is not the life within us that which produces consciousness? What is this within the human organism that makes us conscious when there is no special interest, thought, or effort in any direction? This consciousness that we are seems to carry forward the beating of the heart, the circulating of the blood, the digesting of the food, and all the processes of life without any apparent effort or annoyance on our part. The child lives, grows, plays, and amuses itself while this is something that we call life is carrying on the work of building and developing the child into the man. If, however, the slightest derangement occurs in the internal workings of the body, pain is the result, and the peace and joy in the consciousness of being is disturbed. As this consciousness controls the body in its work of self-building and self-maintenance in the child as well as the man, may it not be called vital thought? In the consideration of intuition, in the preceding chapter, we referred to the law in accordance with which we were brought into being, in accordance with which the life is gathered from God the creative source, ensphered and bound for the uses of the organism. Now, this life has within itself all qualities. There is the life that organizes and forms the bird, the cat life, that forms the cat, and the horse life, that forms the horse. Each one of the different qualities of life forms an organism suitable for the expression of its own kind or quality. Even if we do not admit that God is the creator of all things, we must admit that there is a fountain from which all creative life springs and multiplies its kind. We know also that the study of living creatures shows that some life, grow, and are normal and happy under conditions that would be destructive to others, again showing the great variety in the quality of life. And whether these various forms of animate existence think or not, they certainly act in many respects as man acts when he thinks, so that we cannot avoid the suggestion that the kind or quality of life is the kind of thought, desire, and consequently, action. When we turn our attention to the human family, we recognize there also a great diversity of thought, desire, sympathy, and feature. No two men look alike nor do they think alike. It is a fact well understood in our courts that 2 or 3 men viewing the same scene see it so differently that a disinterested person listening to their testimony cannot but feel that someone is perjuring himself. Apparently, 2 sets of factors come into action to produce this diversity of mind and consciousness. First, the quality of life from which the thought is formed. Second, the beliefs of the person. But, in reality, the quality of life, that is, the character of the consciousness, our vital thought just defined, is determined by the beliefs of the person according to his sphere of use, for the beliefs govern the inspirations which in turn give quality to the life. The plant gathers to itself the elements for use in its growth and preservation, but the human mind, being more highly developed, may gather as wide a diversity of qualities as it has diversity of desire, that is, it may gather any quality that it believes to be useful. The consciousness of the individual, being an aggregate of qualities of universal consciousness, bound or ensphered for a purpose, for use, the individual is acting under a law which enables him to gather within himself, ensphere as an added consciousness, the element of any vital thought that he believes to be useful. It is intimated in the early portion of this chapter, and we believe it is generally admitted, that the activities of the reasoning mind spring from this inner selfhood, that which we have termed the vital thought. Why could not our ancestors in the early stages of the race reason so clearly as we of modern times? Were they not drawing and living from the same great fountains from which we live? Certainly they were, but experience had not matured more perfect brain organs, broader beliefs, and wider sympathies and desires. It has been well said by one of the ancients that, as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. At this point we meet the coincidence of reason and religion. Can we divorce them? Are they not a dual manifestation of the same underlying principle? They are, most unquestionably. Religion has as a base love, desire. Reason is the phenomenon of love. The difference is that religion opens up the life toward its cause, and reason directs life into the active phenomena of forming, or, better still, of being formed into images of which the sensory nerves of the brain take cognizance, when they become conscious thought. But the quality of the thought, as well as the quality of the love, depends upon the quality of the life, and all these depend upon the underlying phenomena of the foundation belief. Why did Jesus the Christ hold so firmly and continuously before the people the importance of belief, and of right belief? Not only so, but he insisted upon the fact that belief without a doubt would give power to control physical nature around one. So extreme was his utterance as to claim that by the means of this belief mountains could be removed from their place. A careful investigator may experiment in the everyday walks of life upon this power of belief in its control of the inspirations of the person. There are people among us denominated spiritualists. The major part of these people are the legitimate outcome of religious devotion on the part of their parents. Spiritualistic mediums are such by organic structure, which leads them to open up their life centers to the psychic currents around them. In order to be mediums, they must be perfectly passive to these influences. Now do not say that mediums are frauds. It is true that some of them are, but many of them are working with forces of which they have no understanding. If you wish to experiment in this direction, sit before a medium and call into activity some point of belief that is latent within you. The medium will probably go into a trance, bring up the subject most active in your mind and begin to ingather and present evidences of the truth of that in which you believe. It matters not whether it is true or not, the medium will inspire, formulate and give you evidences of its truth. Have you not observed the fact that the more a man thinks on a subject of his belief, the more firmly convinced is he of its truth, so that nothing short of the most absolute proof can shake his confidence? Usually, this proof must be so overwhelming as to carry conviction to every sense of his entire nature. Because of this law governing human mind and consciousness, religion should be based upon the conclusions of the clearest reason, in which case belief, the principle underlying the two, will be correct, not specific belief, but belief in its relation to general principles. But to be sure of reliable conclusions, reason must be able to command reliable premises. For what to the world have been the centuries of scientific investigation, the vast resources spent in scientific appliances, if not to discover facts and laws upon which reason may base correct conclusions? Thus giving reason and religion the sure foundation of correct beliefs upon which to rest. Truly, he who neglects to improve the wealth of opportunity, born of such labor and expenditure of means, is remiss in the duty he owes to himself and to his fellow men. Because of the enlightenment of the race, reason and religion must hereafter go forth hand in hand, must stand bosom to bosom, as most lovingly devoted counterparts. Religion is the outflowing, the opening up, of the love toward an object which is believed to be the most desirable, and when man has learned intelligently to open the soul toward its cause, he will then find the fountains of all knowledge. And he has that in him which enables him to draw in, inspire, and cause to act upon the sensorium of his brain the very essence of all there is. When the fundamental principle of belief is properly laid, then the reasoning brain will take these essences and form them into images, and these images will become living stones in the construction of that temple of knowledge in which will dwell God, formed as the immortal soul, and man, the knowing intelligence. End of chapter 3. Next. Chapter 4. Conscience. This selfhood. This consciousness that is conscious without the effort of thinking. This something that is the man, that thinks without his volition. This vital principle, we must admit, has been derived from the creative forces. If this is true and if God is the cause and source of creation, then it is derived directly from God, for God did not create something from nothing, but from himself. Therefore all the life that has been gathered into an organism must be the life of God, and since we can find no place for a boundary line between life and mind, we are brought back to the revelation which says that God by a word created the world. Consequently this life, pure and free, that animates our being, is God's mind and must be orderly and correct in all its conclusions, a fact we have observed in our consideration of the intuitional faculties. But, notwithstanding this truth, there exists an underlying cause which brings error to the mind and death to the body. This cause arises in the nature of the creative word that embodied in itself page 30 a definite purpose, and this purpose became a law governing all life, the purpose being to make man like his creator, having dominion over all things. For this reason, God, the Spirit, gives himself as a servant to the reasoning mind, and while the manifestation is simply the manifestation of the animal instinct, directed by the reason, it is in accordance with pure nature and always informs the mind correctly. But through the love of self-gratification, strong desires arise in the appetites and passions which dominate and overrule the admonitions of the divine mind. Nevertheless, the divine purpose being that the individual is to be the master and that he is to learn and to know, his errors are the means by which experience teaches him the result of disobedience to this divine admonition in the soul, for knowledge is born of experience only. Nevertheless, the divine purpose being that the individual is to be the master and that he is to learn and to know, his errors are the means by which experience teaches him the result of disobedience to this divine admonition in the soul, for knowledge is born of experience only. The divine life, the creative life, in man is absolutely obedient to his wishes and desires. That is, if a man desires a thing that is destructive to him or that is wrong in any way, this divine self admonishes him of the fact, causes him to feel that it is wrong. But if he argues with the higher intelligence, he can coerce it to admit what he wishes it to believe, so that in the reasoning mind it becomes a belief without a doubt. Yet, whenever the reasoning mind is quiet, the interior intelligence continues to impress the consciousness with the fact that its belief is wrong. Each time, however, the reasoning mind rejects its admonition, it becomes weaker and is finally silenced, then the belief becomes the law of the individual. For illustration, a young man beginning life forms conclusions from his contact with the world as to correct methods for accomplishing his highest ambitions. The divine life within constantly remonstrates with him against certain of these conclusions, but he reasons the matter out, justifies his position, in short, creates a code of laws, obedience to which he justifies, and disobedience to which he condemns. Every intelligent being does this. He may accept the ready-made laws held in common by those around him, but he creates a set of laws in connection with them, if not an entirely new set. But whatever laws are accepted by the person are also accepted by the divine self, the intuitive, vital consciousness, and the divine self acts in accordance with them. God in man, like an over-indulgent mother, serves him faithfully in his desires and beliefs, preserving the body, eliminating poisons, and gathering for him the pure essence of life. But when his sinning against nature has made his case hopeless in view of the original purpose, then the divine within him unites with the adverse forces to tear down the organism and thus to destroy him. Now bear in mind the following. Appetites and passions create desires. By means of the reasoning faculties, desires create beliefs of which the soul consciousness, the divine life within, makes a law, the law of the individual life. This law is the religious faith, and when it is established, the conscience justifies everything in accordance with it and condemns everything contrary to it. Consequently, conscience, which the world and especially the church have relied upon as a guide, becomes a guide in its relation only to established beliefs. Take in illustration the story of the Arab father whose wife became the mother of a beautiful female child. According to his religious belief, the child must be destroyed, as it was not among the number that it was lawful to preserve. But the child was very beautiful and the mother persuaded the father to allow it to live. As the years went on, however, his conscience pricked him continually, and as the child neared maturity he could no longer endure the condemnation of conscience and consequently put the girl to death. Had he been a Christian, he would have considered this act a great crime and his conscience never would have forgiven him, but with the Arab, the case was reversed. Now the question arises. If this life, this source of the intuitive and higher mentality, this producer of all mind, is one with God the creator of all things, why should it impress one in a certain direction and another in the opposite direction? The answer is, in order that the creative purpose may be worked out in nature, and individual experience become knowledge from which to form a law more and more correct, a law finally in harmony with divine law, a law according to the nature of the God of the universe. In order that man may realize that he only is responsible for every act of his life, he must be at liberty to commit error and to suffer the result of it, and to do right and to enjoy the benefits arising therefrom. God, the source and essence of his life, leaves him free to experiment with all the laws of his nature. When a man makes a law which he decides is good, the good is such in view of his purpose, in view of the object desired. And the divine life within impresses the consciousness with the thought of error when he does those things which are contrary to his own law, the law under which he is working for the accomplishing of his purpose. For good is that which does good in view of a purpose. Conscience admonishes in accordance with these facts so that the man is able to centralize all his powers in whatever direction he chooses. But if the law man makes is not in harmony with the divine purpose, with the trend of universal creation, He not only meets many difficulties in his way, but at the end he will find that he has built his house upon the sand, that he has built a structure that must be destroyed. Thus, while God, the source of life, serves man's will faithfully, yet at the same time man himself is made responsible for the result of every act. By this means man is made conscious of his true need and awakened to an eager pursuit of knowledge. By reason of the great diversity of human life, there is necessarily a great diversity of individual conception of truth, but nevertheless there are general laws which all thinking intelligences can recognize and do recognize when presented in an orderly form, and these laws furnish a foundation for correct reasoning. The Apostle states that all men are members of one body and that each is a member in particular. That each man does represent a function of the human organism is undoubtedly a truth, in accordance with which, when the great foundation principles of true knowledge are presented and accepted, everyone will take up some specific line of activity according to his function in the grand body, and will carry out some particular phase of truth peculiar to his own mental formation. Nevertheless, it will be truth because it is based upon demonstrable facts, facts that underlie all truth. Thus it will take all members of the body of humanity to grasp, comprehend, and ultimate all truth. But surely we have reached a stage of development when the fundamental, the underlying facts we are presenting, may be known and made the cornerstone of the grand temple of knowledge. We therefore hope that this little volume may aid in bringing to the mind of the reader great general facts, or even that it may suggest the necessity of the knowledge of such facts. End of Chapter 4. Next Chapter 5. Evolution. There are many difficulties in the way of the universal acceptance of evolution as an established fact, as an obvious law of nature, and, at the foundation of these difficulties, is the Christian belief, which underlies our civilization. The Christian world has believed it to be a literal fact that in 6 days God created the world and everything in it, and then ceased from the work of creation. Recently, however, there has been such an accumulation of evidence disproving this statement that the majority of thinkers are rejecting the old form of belief, and it is now generally accepted that, in place of 6 days, we must understand 6 periods of time, cycles. This is in accord with the words of the Christ who, when he was rebuked for working on the Sabbath day, replied, "My Father worketh even until now, and I work." John version 17. If God had not ceased from his work at the time of Christ, we have no reason to think that he has ceased at the present time. On the contrary, we see progression all around us, in every department of life. If a nation ceases to progress, renew its life and constantly unfold higher characteristics, it soon perishes and passes away, and the individual is subject to the same law. We have but to look back 50 years to see the marked progress, not only in science, art, and mechanics, but in the actual brain power and organic quality of the people. Another difficulty in the way of accepting the theory of evolution is that the work of archaeologists has revealed indications of a high state of civilization which antedates history. It has been urged, and we think reasonably, that there are evidences of an early civilization more advanced than our own. We should remember that there are a few isolated cases in which even the American Indian has obtained knowledge of certain things that we do not possess, and certainly more should be expected of old nations that had reached a comparatively high state of civilization. Racial evolution, it has been said, and it is a historic fact, that the star of empire westward takes its course. We have before us today the great, old nation of China, embodying the civilization of a remote period. Next, in order of time and place, come India, Egypt, and the countries east of the Mediterranean, Palestine, where our Lord gave the revelation of the Christian religion. This religion has traveled westward over the continent of Europe until it has reached the Atlantic coast, and has crossed to America, where its light shines from the Atlantic to the Pacific, the dawn of which is beginning to break over China and India. Again, civilization in its nature is cumulative. Like the winding of a thread upon a ball, as in a sense, it overlaps itself, it buries beneath the surface the old, only that it may establish the new upon ever higher ground. When we look for an immediate cause for the successive rise and decadence of nations and their civilization, we find that each nation, having reached in its turn a comparatively high state of development, probably as high as it was capable of reaching, was overcome and destroyed by nations less advanced than itself. For history makes the fact clear that, as man ascends in the scale of development, he sees the folly of war, combat, and struggle. He tires of struggling and arranges an order of peace, and thus soon loses the ability to protect himself when the lower races come in and destroy him. We also find that the civilization of a nation has been led out always by some special principle. In the case of the Greeks, it was the love of beauty and the perfection of physical manhood. We may say that art was the center of their civilization. With the Romans, it was conquest and love of power, which degenerated into self-indulgence and oppression until finally they lost their power and fell. The center around which the civilization of Egypt gathered was magic, the laws of nature, and the psychic forces in the human family. Thus, could we possess the history in detail of every nation that has risen and fallen, we should find that, like vegetable life, each possessed its own specific quality. Each grew and matured a special quality of mind which, like the husk of the grain of wheat, enveloped some great truth, and when maturity came and its work was accomplished, the nation passed away as a form of vegetable life that had borne its ripe fruitage. However, we find that the civilization of the present age has reached a point where science and mechanics have obliterated space and, in a sense, time. The whole world, the ancient and the modern, is rapidly being spread before the public gaze, and our race of today is eagerly gathering all the grains of wheat, the great central truths that have matured in the mind of civilizations from the earliest times throughout its successive stages to the present. Libraries, so ancient that history has no record of the people that made them, are now being unearthed. Nations, so far removed in the dim twilight of the past that we have no means of knowing the time of their existence, are now presenting the very details of their domestic life to our scrutiny. All these things demonstrate the fact that the race has now reached a stage of development where it feels the need of, and consequently is about to gather, the ripe fruitage of all ages. The race is delving into the quarries of the present and of the past, that, from the work of the hewers of all nations and all times, it may construct a temple of knowledge transcending Solomon's in all its glory, transcending anything that has ever existed upon the planet. While the accumulation of knowledge has been going on so rapidly during the last century, the mind of the scientist has been intently fixed upon material manifestation. He has searched wisely and diligently for causation in every physical direction until he has reached the last residuum of matter, a mere point of force, and he can go no further until he recognizes the source and nature of this force. As there are small cycles of national development and race development, so there are great cycles of world development, planetary cycles. If we had a history of the grand cycle preceding the present one, the elder world, e. Esdras v. 13, to which there are numerous incidental references in our Bible and of which the sacred books of the East speak so positively, then we should find that, while its people reached a high state of maturity and spirituality, they were a race round lower than the present humanity. Evolution of the planet. Modern scientists run back in the history of the Earth to the time supposed to have existed when the planet was nebulous matter floating in space, and there they must stop. For, in following theories relative to the formation of the Earth, many of them ignore the idea of a God, a creator, and say that everything is the outcome of natural law. In the very presence of a disaster like the great earthquake in San Francisco, even the clergy unite in saying that God had nothing to do with it, that it was simply a natural phenomenon. This is as much as to say that God has nothing to do with the affairs of nations or of men, that natural law and the phenomena of nature are all there is. They do not think sufficiently to ask what is meant by natural law. It is true that everything follows a certain sequence, cause and effect run through everything that we know. But let us trace back a little further. Let us turn the telescope upon space. Way yonder we see a nebulous mass, bright and luminous as a flaming sun, but, as we carefully observe it, we find that we can look through it at some great sun in the far distance as if the nebula were but a thin veil over the face of the star, thus proving beyond question that this nebulous matter is what has been denominated luminous gas. Many theories have been advanced concerning this luminous substance, and many have concluded that it is gas heated to great intensity. At the same time, they tell us that it is floating in a medium 100, if not 1,000 times colder than the temperature at the North Pole. But no one has attempted to tell us why this luminous gas interpenetrated by and floating in such cold can remain heated to the intensity claimed. They may philosophize and try to explain how it is possible for intense heat to be retained when interpenetrated and surrounded by intense cold, but the fact remains that nothing that is known to man makes it possible for a cloud of gas to remain heated for 1 second in a medium so contrary to heat, to say nothing of the untold years that it is supposed to have remained in this state. In order to account for its luminosity under such conditions, we must look for something beyond the experience of everyday life. The recent discovery of radium, however, evinces the fact that it is possible for an element of nature to remain in a luminous state, and actually heated to a certain degree, which even the cold of liquid air cannot extinguish. Is this newfound element on the borderline between spirit and the natural world? If we interrogate the Bible, we find there numerous accounts of visitations from the spirit world, sometimes in a flame of fire, as God appeared to Moses in a burning bush, and the bush was not consumed. At other times, the person of the visitant was said to be as shining as the light, or as bright as the sun. When a holy one from the spirit world enters a man's presence, though it is in the darkness of the night, in the darkest room, the darkness is at once dissipated and all is bright and luminous. The luminous brightness is not seen merely with the spiritual eye but with the natural eye as well. We read that God is spirit and dwells in the light that no man can approach. Again, the assertion is emphatic that by the word of God the worlds were made, and surely we cannot believe that God created something from nothing, therefore God created from himself. And this nebulous matter of which worlds are formed is the substance of spirit, a substance which is the emanation of thought of divinity. We think, form conclusions, and when the conclusions are reached we express them in words and acts. When we say that we express them, we mean that there goes out from us the thought form. In like manner, when, in connection with the other creative words, the Elohim said, "Let us make man," the thought was formed in the mind and sent out into space. The substance of his own great nature appeared luminous and bright, as the body of an angel, which scientists call cosmic gas. As this cosmic gas was a thought of divinity, its mind power became what is known as the laws of nature, and, in the eons of time, formed our earth, and has carried forward the evolutionary development of individual organisms, step by step, to the present time. Here we are met by two apparent discrepancies. First, that spirit is invisible to man. Second, that planets are born from their parent suns. Both of these objections resolve themselves into one, and in reply, it may be said that, if God created the world and what is in it from himself, and if God is spirit, then all that is must be a condition of spirit. Man, the product of that creative mind, is able to recognize through the five senses that only which is upon a plane similar to his own. Therefore, as the spirit appears to us in the creation of worlds, it first manifests itself as light, and also as heat, because of the intensity of its vibration. Thus it is in this form that the Word of God appears in the very beginnings of material substance. In regard to the second objection, that God cannot be the creator of worlds if they are born from their parent suns, it may be further suggested that, if God is the producer of all things, the life and substance of all substance, the soul of all souls, then wherever God works there is form and function. Worlds and suns are in form, and their inhabitants that have become the embodiment of spirit, the Elohim, are his function. God works in man and woman in the creation of offspring, and should we deny that he is working in the creation of worlds through their parent suns? Joint evolution of planet and race. The purpose in the creation of the planet, as announced in the account of Genesis, was to make man in his image and like God. If, therefore, this was the purpose in the thought, the word, which became the creative law in all nature, then it is obvious that all things must move together toward the accomplishing of the one definite object. Even the old philosopher, Plato, saw the image of the thought of divinity, as a man stretched in the heavens. And today it is a demonstrated fact that the tendency of all creation, of all growth and development, is toward man. This being so, we see man, the most perfect manifestation of creative law, a conscious, thinking, voluntary existence. The religionist says that man is a special creation. Science says that man is the product of the creative laws of the earth. Both are right, for although we read in the Revelation that God said, "Let us make man," and that he made man, yet this was in connection with, and a part of, the creative words from which the worlds were made. See Genesis I. Man is a special creation because he is the special purpose and the result of all creative law. The apostle said, "For we know that the whole creation groaneth and travaileth in pain together until now. And not only so, but ourselves also, which have the first fruits of the Spirit, even we ourselves groan within ourselves, waiting for the adoption, to wit, the redemption of our body." Romans v. 22:23. Yes, truly, the whole creation travaileth, and this travail of nature is to bring forth man. The spirit of life in the grass today will be the man that will walk the planet in the far-off tomorrow. But the fact is not changed. Man was created by the thought of God, and so was the world, and the two were conjoined as one. There is within man an instinctive recognition of his source and destiny. The tendencies of his unbiased nature are toward God and his likeness. It has been closely observed and well said that, from his incipient stages of development, man has been a religious being. A race of savages scarcely has been found so low in development that they have not had some form of religious worship or recognition of God, the source of their being. At the present time, however, as a result of his selfishness, self-gratification and intellectual egotism, man has so completely turned his back upon God and divine law that he has begun to repel the very fountain from which he derives his life. The effects of this discordant condition of man and his repellent attitude toward the source of his life are obvious. He, being the ultimate of planetary law, is in position to dominate all nature, for the declared purpose was, let them have dominion over all the earth. From a physical standpoint, the dominion of man over the earth is even now being recognized, but the materialistic tendencies of the race have prevented a recognition of the fact that the passions, emotions, desires, together with the page 46 loves and hates of the people, are a controlling principle producing its effect throughout creative manifestation. Man is the mind center of the planet and his body is one with the earth elements, joined to them by the mental currents that formed all things. Therefore, as the bodies of the race have become diseased through perversion, disease and disturbance have entered also into the very life currents of the earth. And we may reasonably expect volcanic eruptions, earthquakes producing great destruction, fires becoming fiends, refusing to be quenched by ordinary methods, storms and cyclones. We may expect the earth to manifest the same conditions that our own bodies manifest when suffering from different phases of what we call disease, and if this should continue, the very condition of the planet will cause death, dissolution. If the perversion of man's nature diseases and destroys the planet, the reverse must be also true. That is, divine order and harmony manifested in the individual are a saving power to the earth. Our Lord recognized this law when he said to his followers, "Ye are the salt of the earth. But if the salt have lost its savor, wherewith shall it be salted? It is thenceforth good for nothing, but to be cast out and to be trodden under foot of men." Matt. Version 13. We are told in the revelation of Jesus Christ, sent to John on Patmos, that there are to be page 47, paragraph continues, 144,000 of the first ripe fruit of the earth, who are to be gathered and brought into perfect oneness and harmony with God, and to be made priests and kings unto God and reign on the earth. As the Spirit said to Obadiah, "And Saviors shall come up on Mount Zion to judge the mount of Esau, and the kingdom shall be Yahweh's." History, science, and revelation point down to a time, the present time or the near future, when, notwithstanding the fact that man has forgotten God, notwithstanding the diseased state of the planet, the upheavals and the destruction of life and property, which will almost depopulate the earth, there will be a saving power in a people. And this people, by the power of unity with the mind of God, the producer of all things, will hold the earth as a vital center, preserve its life, heal it of all disease, rejuvenate it, and repopulate it with a higher race of men. As Jesus was the great healer of all manner of disease, so this body of 144,000 will become the great healers, not only of the interior natures of the people, but of their physical bodies, and of the spirit of the life of the planet. From the foregoing presentation of the ultimate toward which the life of the planet tends, that is, to bring into manifestation a godlike manhood which is to dominate the earth, it becomes evident that a slow growth and unfoldment, evolution, has been the process of nature from the beginning of page 48 the world to the present time. If this were not true, the following and many similar questions which arise in the mind of the reasonable thinker would remain unanswerable. Namely, if there is a God, why does he permit so much anxiety, labor, and sorrow to exist in the world? If there is to be a future existence, a paradise of joy and peace, why the necessity of these thousands of generations being doomed to sorrow and death? Why did not God in the beginning make man perfect, and place him in that paradise, and endow him with wisdom, knowledge and understanding, so that he could not fall and plunge the race into misery for all these centuries? Why was not this kingdom of righteousness, spoken of in the revelation of Jesus Christ, commonly called the apocalyptic vision, ultimated in the beginning? The only answer to such questions is that knowledge in its very nature is experience. Every father and mother knows that before their sons are fitted to go out to meet the world, they must have knowledge gained from experience. The Christ announced that knowledge of the truth was to be the Savior, John v. 32, and knowledge can come into existence and form only through multifarious experiences in many lives. The present exposition of the object and processes of evolution has been as condensed as possible, merely suggestive of the several lines of thought and investigation connected therewith. But, we think, it is sufficient to make clear the fact that the very spirit of the life of the planet has in it a purpose, an object, and all manifestation of life, all activity, has moved steadily toward the ultimate of that purpose, namely, to bring into existence a godlike humanity. Emmanuel, God with us, God manifest in the flesh, angel men, sons of God. When we say, angel men, or sons of God, the words are practically meaningless from the world's present understanding of God and his angels. It is, therefore, necessary to take a general view of the scientific knowledge of the universe and of the revelation given to men of God and his angels, so that the reader will bear with me if I seem to diverge from the general thought of this work and to examine into the material universe, its cause, its scope and immensity, its origin and quality, into the nature of God, the soul of the universe, his manifestation in organic form, as well as the object of our existence and the ultimate toward which we with all nature are being led. End of Chapter 5. The goal of life. Next. Chapter 6. Other worlds than ours. A subject of so vast proportions as the title of this chapter indicates, naturally suggests exhaustive study of the investigations of scientists, ancient and modern. But for the sake of brevity, and because the conclusions of ancient philosophy are not accepted in our time, we omit its consideration and confine ourselves to an examination of a small portion of modern investigation. The unity of opinion, however, on the part of our modern scientists and the fact that their investigations are accessible to everyone, make it unnecessary to quote from them, more than just enough to show that the truths we are about to present are in trend with the scientific mind of the day. It seems that the only objection science has to offer to the theory that the planets are inhabited is that the conditions existing upon them make life, as we know it, impossible. They object that upon certain of the planets, and especially upon the Sun, there is an absence of the conditions that make life possible upon our own Earth. But what do we mean by the terms life, living matter, and so on? In their investigations, physicists have reached the point where matter is reduced to a mere center of force, and where heat is only the rate of speed of motion in matter. In the light of these facts, can the line between living and non-living matter be drawn? It has never been drawn, and we are prepared to say that it never will be. Professor Bose, in his book entitled, Response in the Living and Non-Living, claims to have scientifically demonstrated that there is no essential difference between animal, vegetable, or mineral life. He shows also that metals, like the animal organism, can be put to sleep, poisoned, revived, and finally killed. Thus we are forced to the conclusion that what we call matter is a living organism. It should be remembered that iron is purified by fire, as in fact are all the metals. It does not kill the life of iron or steel to put it into the furnace and melt it. On the contrary, it seems to bring it into a condition where the life qualities are more perfectly manifested. And our Earth, science tells us, has come from a state of incandescence. Intense heat has prepared it to bring forth living organisms. Yes, more, the heat is absolutely essential to the perpetuation of these organisms. It is true that our own life requires what we call a moderate amount of heat, but it is well known that there are microbes that subjected to a very intense heat still live. If life in its diminutive forms exists under such conditions, may not the same possibility for life exist in more highly organized forms? May there not be organisms of intelligence, great and mighty minds, whose natural element is a heat transcending our imagination? The biblical account states that the 3 Hebrew children were thrown into a furnace heated 7 times hotter than it was wont, that Nebuchadnezzar looking and saw a 4th form like unto a son of man, and that the 3 Hebrews came out unharmed. The Bible also declares that God is a consuming fire, and while such quotations may have no scientific bearing, they at least show that Revelation seeks to impress upon our minds not only that the cause of all life and being is fire, but that fire in itself is more like God than anything else that we know. This is in harmony with the scientific conclusion that every substance originated in fire, the incandescent gas from which worlds were made, and may not the Christ have announced a law when he said, I came out from God, and I return to God? If the planets came out from fire, may they not return to fire? If God, the source of all mind, of all life, of all action, in short, of all there is a consuming fire, and if the highest angels that the earth's inhabitants have ever seen appear as flaming fire, is it not reasonable to believe that those blazing suns that illuminate the heavens are the abodes of high and holy beings whose very substance is a flame of fire? When we say their very substance is a flame of fire, do not allow your mind to think of fire from the standpoint of a child. Science has demonstrated that fire is nothing more or less than what is called matter in great activity, the atoms of which are in violent vibration, and there are evidences in human life that the higher the organism the more rapid are the vibrations of the life currents in the organism. So that if we allow our reason full scope in connection with what has already been accepted as divine revelation and as the truths of science, we may believe, with good reason, that all the heavenly bodies are inhabited. While inquiring into the facts relative to the universe, the reader should remember that the search is not merely for the wonderful, but for the purpose of confirming and enlarging our conception of God. The answer to the question, are the planets and suns inhabited? That naturally arises in the mind, necessarily reveals the wonders and greatness of the mind, the consciousness, the intelligence that we call spirit, God, the cause of all things. Astronomers, in their investigation of the solar system, perceive that the larger planets lying beyond our own are less dense and, to a certain degree, self-luminous, and they inquire, is it possible for life to exist upon these worlds? Such a question can be answered only by logical deduction. The best intellects will say, if we have to consider these things at all, we must search for the most logical hypotheses, and there wait until evidences multiply to assure us of their correctness or incorrectness. In the absence of inspiration, if men cannot trust their reason, there is nothing that they can trust. Therefore, very little is accepted as fact in regard to the systems of the universe. In order to reach conclusions by means of the reason, we must first examine facts upon our own planet and from these facts draw inferences as to what exists upon other worlds. Turning our attention to our own world and traversing the extreme north among icebergs and perpetual snows, we find there the Eskimos and many forms of animal life. Going to the hottest part of our globe, we find that inhabited. In fact, we find no place too hot, no place too cold, no place too barren, in short, no conditions existing on our globe which make life impossible. Furthermore, the geologist has been able to turn a few pages of nature's past history, and he has discovered the remains of weird and strange creatures. Indeed, it is impossible to picture the great diversity of vegetable and animal life which has been found to exist on this globe, life which it would be unable to support under the present terrestrial conditions. He has been able to turn pages that extend over millions of years, but he has found no period that does not give evidence of life. Finally, it has been proved that the earth itself is a body of life, its very substance is life. Sometimes we shall know that there is no such thing as dead matter, that all is mind, spirit, or soul substance. We believe that the majority of those who have studied our system and the universe in general agree with the astronomer Proctor in Other Worlds Than Ours, when he says, concerning the habitability of planets and systems of worlds, I have already spoken of the conclusions to be drawn from the existence of the same materials in the substance of the sun that exist around us on this earth. I have shown that we are compelled to regard this general resemblance of structure as sufficient to prove that the other planets resemble the Earth, since we have no reason to believe that our Earth bears an exceptionally close resemblance to the Sun as respects the elements of which she is composed. Since, then, we have reason to believe that all the planets which circle around the Sun are constituted of the same materials which exist in his substance, though these materials are not necessarily nor probably combined in the same proportions throughout the solar system, we have every reason which analogy can give us for believing that the planets circling around Betelgeuse or Aldebaran are constituted of the same materials which exist in the substance of their central luminary. Thus we are led to a number of interesting conclusions even respecting orbs which no telescope that man can construct is likely to reveal to his scrutiny. The existence of such elements as sodium or calcium in those other worlds suggests the probable existence of the familiar compounds of these metals, soda, salt, lime, and so on. Again, the existence of iron and other metals of the same class carries our minds to the various useful purposes for which these metals are made to subserve on the Earth. We are at once invited to recognize that the orbs circling around those distant suns are not meant merely to be the abode of life, but that intelligent creatures, capable of applying these metals to useful purposes, must exist in those worlds. We need not conclude, indeed, that at the present moment every one of those worlds is peopled with intelligent beings, because we have a good reason for believing that throughout an enormous proportion of the time during which our Earth has existed as a world no intelligent use has been made of the supplies of metal existing in her substance. But that at some time or other those worlds have been or will be the abode of intelligent creatures seems to be a conclusion very fairly deducible from what we now know of their probable structure. Thus the fact that the stars send forth heat to the worlds which circle around them suggests at once the thought that on those worlds there must exist vegetable and animal forms of life. That natural phenomena, such as we are familiar with as due to the solar heat, must be produced in those worlds by the heat of their central sun. And that works such as those which man undertakes on earthworks in which intelligent creatures use nature's powers to master nature to their purposes, must go on in the worlds which circle around Aldebaran and Betelgeuse, around Vega, Capella, and the blazing Sirius. Professor Proctor's reasoning here is good so far as it goes, and we believe meets with general approval. His reasoning, that the fact that these instrumentalities of use exist is in itself an evidence that there are intelligences to use them, is good, because all who have given thought to nature's methods see that use determines all qualities, whether good or evil, and that nothing exists in this world that has not a use. And if there is an intelligent creator, it certainly would impeach his intelligence. It even impeaches the intelligence of a man, to be constantly producing useless things. Only an idiot would sit and work continuously when no object or use could be accomplished. When an intelligent man is employed in work, he seeks to serve a use. Is God less intelligent than man? Has he created millions, untold millions of worlds and systems of worlds, that have no use? Can we imagine that these untold millions of worlds exist only to beautify our little grain of sand? Such thoughts are unworthy of intelligent beings. No doubt the present theory, that the sun is an incandescent mass, because the solar rays on striking the earth generate heat, is destined soon to be superseded by one more worthy of the intelligence of our day. Professor Proctor says, "We know that the sun is the sole source whence light and heat are plentifully supplied to the worlds that circle around him." The question immediately suggests itself. Whence does the sun derive those amazing stores from whence he is continually supplying his dependent worlds? We know that, were the sun a mass of burning matter, he would be consumed in a few thousand years. We know that were he simply a heated body, radiating heat and light continually into space, he would in like manner have exhausted all his energies in a few thousand years, a mere day in the history of his system. Whence, then, comes the enormous supply of force which he has afforded for millions on millions of years, and which also our reason tells us he will continue to afford while the worlds which circle around him have need of it, in other words, for countless ages yet to come. The recent discovery of radium has already suggested to many astronomers that our sun and all the suns of the universe may be luminous from another cause than fire, as fire is generally known, that there is a light that has the appearance of fire, like the burning bush that burned, but was not consumed, which Moses saw when he was commissioned to deliver Israel from bondage. That which is called fire has been a mystery through all time, and is as much a mystery today as it was in the days of the fire worshippers, yea, more of a mystery today. For the child race lived so near to nature that the thought formed in its brain was by virtue of the universal mind, and came nearer the truth, in many respects, than the mind that has shut itself against everything that cannot be demonstrated in the physical. When our philosophers have fully accepted the fact that the so-called blazing suns are not blazing with consuming fire, but with an illuminating property which perhaps will always be beyond the power of the deepest research to fathom, then their theories will be reversed. Revelation says that God is a consuming fire, so that until they are able to comprehend something of God, they can never fully comprehend the cause of light. We repeat, when philosophers are able to grasp this thought, they will find that in reasoning from analogy concerning nature's methods they will need make no leaps. Evolution is generally accepted as the universal law. It is certainly the law of all things that we know on earth. Gradual development seems to characterize everything that exists. It is said that every generation becomes weaker and wiser. As mind develops in the man, the physical strength and avoirdupois lessen. Everything points to the truth of the statement in Revelation that all growth, evolutionary processes, is carrying the whole creation onward and upward toward the likeness of its cause, and if the first cause of all things is spirit, and the tendency of all things is toward spirit, then it follows that the avoirdupois, the density of substance, must decrease, as, not man only, but worlds go on in their process of refinement and spiritualization. There is a marked difference between the organisms of the lower races and the organisms of the higher, and we know too that there is a marked difference in the light that shines from the face of one of a highly intellectual organism, especially when the mind is clear and active and everything in the body is at its best, and in the light from the face of a lower type. A natural light shines forth from a highly spiritualized face, a light that is not imaginary but real, a light that anybody that is in the habit of observing can see even from a distance. Some years ago I called on a friend who, on my arrival, was not at home, but soon after he came in and stepped from the hall into the back parlor. I was sitting in the front parlor by the window and, as he looked in while taking off his overcoat, I said to his wife, "What is the matter with Mr. B?" She inquired why I asked, and I replied, "His face is so dark." She then informed me that he had been out on business in which there was much trouble and anxiety. All this had cast over his face a shadow, a darkness so marked that it could be seen the length of the room. Probably all who are observant have noticed that a condition of anxiety or disappointment throws a shadow over the face, making the countenance actually shadowy and dark. If, then, in ordinary life, a state of mind illuminates or darkens the countenance, and many readers will bear witness to this statement, is not this fact at least a suggestion that the more highly developed the soul, the greater the luminosity that emanates from the body? We are told many times in sacred history that celestial visitants were shining as the light, in some cases so bright that they could not be looked upon. Development means the increasing and the intensifying of the life energy, which beyond a certain point reaches luminosity. The fact that development and spiritualization are always accompanied by illumination has been accepted by all spiritually developed men, and by those who know something of mature souls that have passed into the spirit world. And from the evidence that we have been able to gather, we have come to the conclusion that as worlds age and develop, they, as well as their inhabitants, become more spiritualized and luminous. We reason that there can be nothing born, nothing come into manifestation without a parent, let it be plant, animal, or man. In continuing the analogy, we are forced to the conclusion that there is a parental source for every world, and if worlds have a parentage, then we necessarily reject the nebular hypothesis, so far as it relates to the formation of worlds independent of the sun around which they revolve. If worlds form from nebulae in space without any parental agency, then we conclude that life may be born on our planet without the agency of parentage. In fact, we are left open to accept almost any theory. It is not so unreasonable to suppose that a mother could bring forth a child without a father as to believe that a world can be formed without a father or a mother. On the other hand, it is evident that worlds are ruled by the same law that governs individuals, that our sun has brought forth and thrown into space a system of worlds, and that some of these worlds have begun to have a family of their own. It is not known if the younger planets, that is, Venus and Mercury, have moons. But Earth has one child, the Moon. Mars has 2, Jupiter, 7, and Saturn, 10. So we conclude that as worlds are born from their parent suns, they are less in size, denser, and more opaque, and need the more direct rays of their parent sun for growth and maturity. But as ages roll on, these worlds grow and become more self-existent, more refined and luminous, and organize for themselves a family of worlds, shedding their light upon their children's life. Thus is carried forward the work of birth and development in all systems of suns and worlds, and if it is a law that the progress of every world is from density and opacity to refinement and luminosity, then the astronomical observations that many of the suns floating in space are less dense than our sun, and that the outermost planets of our solar system are less dense than the inner planets, are undoubtedly correct and substantiate our conclusion. We believe it is generally accepted that light is due to a certain speed of electric vibrations. We have been led to say that light is life in motion, and light on one plane of existence is darkness to another. For instance, we have animals and birds on our planet at the present time that evidently never saw the sun. The light of the sun to them is darkness. A good illustration of this is the owl. The owl may be sitting upon a fence or the limb of a tree, and if the sun is shining brightly, you may approach him and he is apparently blind, but as the shadows begin to deepen, he begins to see a little, and when total darkness reigns, he sees plainly. This is not only true of the owl but of many insects, birds, and animals. This is at least a suggestion of the following general law, namely, that when a world is born from its central sun, it receives its light and heat from that center, and that it cannot even see light emanating from a higher center, nor feel the heat from a higher center, for the vibrations of that higher center cannot touch it. We believe that if there are inhabitants on our moon, that the earth would be to them a sun, and that they would have no consciousness of our sun. The same would be true of all the satellites of Mars, Jupiter, and the other planets. We see the sun and feel its light and are dependent upon its emanating life for our existence, because it is our parent, and we believe that when the inhabitants of the earth have developed to a higher plane of existence, they will begin to see shining worlds in space that now are entirely invisible to us. Suns and systems so glorious and bright, so refined and ethereal that their emanations do not touch anything that belongs to us, and therefore we know nothing of their existence. So that there may be suns immensely greater and brighter than our sun, even nearer to us than our sun, and yet we know nothing about them. Again, we quote from Professor Proctor's book entitled, Other Worlds Than Ours. Or if we estimate Jupiter rather by the forces inherent in his system, if we contemplate the enormous rapidity with which his vast bulk whirls round upon his axis, or trace the stately motion with which he sweeps onward on his orbit, or measure the influences by which he sways his noble family of satellites, we are equally impressed with the feeling that here we have the prince of all the planets, the orb which, of all others in the solar scheme, suggests to us conceptions of the noblest forms of life. The very symmetry and perfection of the system which circles around Jupiter have led many to believe that he must be inhabited by races superior in intelligence to any other people on our Earth. The motions of these bodies afford indeed to our astronomers a noble subject of study. If the course of all worlds, as well as the course of their inhabitants, is from the grosser to the finer, then the inevitable conclusion is that the Sun, our parent world, must be a planet in a state of development so far beyond, so much more spiritualized than our world, that its light is spiritual fire, and if our central luminary has been born from another world, we may expect that the parent of our Sun is as much beyond our Sun in luminosity, refinement, and spirituality, as our Sun is more luminous than our Earth. Following the same analogy leads us to say that the parent of our Sun must have a parent from which it was born and that it is also transcendently more refined and spiritualized than its child. If worlds are born from their parents and become luminous suns, their density decreasing, or, in other words, if they become more refined, then, by an ever-increasing ratio we may trace on, infinitely on, from child to parent in world life, until worlds become so refined and attenuated that they are, so far as we are able to discern, immaterial. It also follows from the mutual relation of a planet and its people that, as those luminous worlds unfold and develop, so their inhabitants unfold and develop, becoming together more refined and luminous. And as this refinement and spiritualization is the law of growth, there necessarily is a point where these immense worlds, with their inhabitants, become invisible, even spirit substance to our comprehension. And if worlds have existed from all eternity, then it necessarily follows that all space throughout the immensity of the universe is filled and interfilled with worlds and systems of worlds, each governed by its own law, and each becoming higher, and still higher, more spiritual, and yet more spiritual, fine and ethereal, so that our solar system may be floating through a body of immense worlds, so refined, so spiritualized, that we have no consciousness of their presence, nor they of ours. Thus the manifestations of God, Spirit, are without limit, as to extent and planes of existence. Here our finite thought ends, but we see that there is no place where there is not an expression of God, a body formed by that Spirit that is omnipresent, who is the formless mind and will of all universes, formless, yet forming all things, expressionless, yet organizing forms to become the expression of his own great mind. And thus we find ourselves thinking of God, Spirit, formless substance, continually forming and expressing himself through the forms that he has made. Addendum. We quote from the Literary Digest, NY November 10, 1906, the following excerpts from the work of Professor Kirschman and comments, as they furnish interesting thought on the line of the foregoing chapter. Life in other worlds. The probability, or even the possibility, of life in other worlds than our own is denied by the veteran English scientist, Dr. Alfred Russel Wallace, in his book on Man's Place in the Universe. This opinion is vigorously combated in a pamphlet reprinted from the Transactions of the Royal Astronomical Society of Canada, Toronto, 1906, by Dr. A. Kirschman, Professor of Philosophy in the University of Toronto. Space forbids allusion to all of Dr. Kirschman's arguments, but he makes, in particular, an ingenious use of the hypothesis of the relativity of things, which is worthy of notice. To the relativity of magnitudes, for instance, he will admit absolutely no limit, and he, therefore, maintains the possibility of living beings so huge that every molecule of their bodies is as great as our solar system, or so small that countless hosts of them may dwell together on one of our molecules. Perhaps, he says, the whole galactic system is nothing but one cell of an immense organism. To one who holds this view of matter and life, arguments designed to show that there are no human beings on Venus or Mars are evidently inadequate. Says Professor Kirschman, we must not forget that the greatness of the universe known to us is only relative. The law of relativity of all magnitudes is not a speculation, but a fact which is given with every experience, and which can be verified at any moment. But we have become accustomed to closing our eyes to it. There is absolutely nothing great or small in the world, and the mathematical conception, so much indulged in, of the approximation to zero is one of the worst fictions which human intelligence ever invented. There can be no part of substance or of empty space though ever so small, which, regarded from another standpoint, is not a large part of matter or of space. Consequently, a single molecule of chalk with its atoms of calcium and oxygen and carbon, these again consisting of millions of ions, and these again of sub-ions, and so on ad infinitum, may be a whole solar system again with a central body, and planets and satellites, containing life in many forms, but for our measure too small to be ever perceived. And, on the other hand, The whole universe, as far as we can fathom it, may be only a small aggregation of particles or cells of a greater and higher organism absolutely unfathomable by us. Somewhat similar to this infinity of magnitudes is the infinity of physical conditions which the writer invokes as another argument in favor of the possibility of life in other worlds. The laws of nature, it is true, may be constant throughout all space and all time, though Professor Kirschman reminds us that even this is not susceptible of proof, but the variety of conditions may still be infinite. We have no reason to believe that life may not be possible under all these variations, for all conditions are relative just as magnitude is. For every change in temperature, in the intensity of gravity, and in the chemical composition of atmospheres, and for every possible combination of these three, there may be a specially adapted organism somewhere. Says the writer. Physically, there is no such thing as cold. The transformation of the uniform series of possible physical temperatures from zero to infinite, different only in intensity, into a manifoldness of two antagonistic qualities, heat and cold, with even a changeable zero point between, is purely physical. If this zero point can vary for us in the different seasons, or on account of after effects and contrast, we should assume that it can vary considerably more under other conditions of gravity and pressure. It is said that life could not exist on Jupiter because its surface is still red hot. But if the zero point of the sense of temperature of the Jovians is shifted for a few hundred degrees, they will have as pleasant a walk on that red surface as we do on the green grass. After all, the ordinary notions of physical temperature as used in cosmology are rather vague and misleading if temperature consists in time and space relations of the kinetic or dynamic elements of matter, or in changes of those relations. Then it is clear that the elements themselves, no matter whether they are atoms, centers of force, ions, or electrons, cannot have any temperature at all. Even Wallace's contention that life is dependent on the presence of carbon, nitrogen, and water is not admitted by Professor Kirschman. Under present conditions, other elements enter into organic combination, and he sees no reason why the relative importance of these should not be vastly greater in other places and at other times. He would admit, perhaps, the possibility of a man made out of iron, bisulfite of carbon, and chlorine. He says, to say that life is dependent on the prevalence of the four organogens on the surface of a planet is again incorrect. They are only the organogens under the conditions of heat, gravity and pressure as they prevail on our Earth. Under other conditions of heat and pressure, other substances, iron, gold, and silicon, may play the role of organogens and form compounds with similar characteristics as those very complex and changeable chemical, organic combinations which respond with partial or complete decomposition to slight stimulation. The neglect of this circumstance is the greatest mistake all those have made who have hitherto written on the subject. To cap the climax, our knowledge of our own relationship to the external world is only relative. Professor Kirschman says of this, there is one more point which should make us modest with regard to our statements about what is possible in other worlds. We are accustomed to think that we are a part of this world, an item in space and time. But this is a matter of belief, not of knowledge or science. On closer examination, we find that what we can say with certainty is that the whole world as we know it is a part of us, of our consciousness. Not that we are in space and time, but space and time are in us. They are the glasses through which alone we can see. We can look through them, but not at them. If we attempt to take them off to look at them, we are totally blind. What they are objectively we do not know. They are the tools with which consciousness works. Time and space are for us the instruments with which we grasp the world. We have a lease of these instruments, and usually a lease for less than 99 years. Whether with different mental instruments other worlds may be opened to us, whether the evil in this world is real or is only a distortion produced by the inadequacy of the tools or the imperfection of us who handle them, we cannot know in this life. We may discover when the lease runs out. End of Chapter 6. Next. Chapter 7. The goal of life. The immensity of the universe. When I consider thy heavens, the work of thy fingers, the moon and the stars which thou hast ordained. What is man, that thou art mindful of him? And the Son of Man that thou visitest him? Some little conception, inadequate as it must be, of the wonders of the universal spirit, the one God, the mind and spirit that rules all things, can be best obtained by making an effort, at least, to think of the immensity of the universe. By this means we may expand our ideals to something like a true conception of the Creator. In doing this, let us begin with the known and build from that to the unknown. We suggest, therefore, that you draw a circle 4 feet, 8 inches in diameter to represent the circumference of the Sun. Then, using the same scale, Place the planets contiguous to each other on the diameter of the circle in the order of their relative sizes. As correctly as can be measured with a carpenter's rule, their diameters are as follows: Mercury, 3/16 of an inch; Mars, 1/4 of an inch; Venus, 7/16 of an inch; Earth, 1/2 of an inch; Uranus, 2 1/16 inches; Neptune, 2 1/4 inches; Saturn, 4 5/8 inches; and Jupiter, 5 1/2 inches. You may approximate the size of the Sun, when you perceive that all the planets, placed side by side on its radius, extend but little over half the distance from the circumference of the Sun to its center. You will observe that Jupiter, the giant of our solar system, contains 1,300 times the volume of our Earth. We also find Jupiter with a diameter about 1/10 of the Sun's diameter. Further comparison shows the Sun with a volume 1,300,000 times that of our Earth. Yet we think our Earth a very large place, do we not? Leaving the confines of the solar system, we now enter for our comparisons a vaster field, the stellar domain. From a recent article in the Scientific American we copy the following. Epsilon Aurigae is supposed to be a double star. The smaller of the two is about 350 million miles in diameter and the larger one about 850 million miles, or about 401,000 times the Sun's diameter. With the scale used in our comparison of the solar system, let us compare Epsilon with the Sun. The Sun's diameter being 4 feet 8 inches, Epsilon's diameter is 4,600 feet. If we imagine a circle of this size on the ground and lay our little chart upon it, we shall gain but a faint idea of the size of our Earth compared with the size of the magnificent Sun Epsilon. In order to comprehend relative size more fully, we shall make another comparison. On a large circle representing Epsilon, let a marble 1/2 an inch in diameter represent the Earth. Now, imagine a man on the marble whose size is in the same proportion to the marble as a man is to the Earth. Then, on a ball with the same diameter as the circle representing Epsilon, imagine a man whose size is in the same proportion to the ball as a man is to the Earth. Or, again, if a man on the planet Epsilon, whose size is in the same proportion to Epsilon as man is to the Earth, should see our large planet, he would doubtless need a microscope to discover man upon it. We make one more comparison. If the Garden of Eden had been on the equator of Epsilon, and Adam, on being driven out from Eden, had begun a journey on a fast express train around Epsilon, making the scheduled time, usually made between New York and San Francisco, about 3,000 miles in 4 days, and had traveled until now, 6,000 years, it would be nearly 4,000 years before he would reach his starting point. Or, in other words, it would take nearly 10,000 years to encircle Epsilon, whereas our globe could be encompassed at the same rate of speed in 33 days. Sirius, the brightest of the fixed stars, is estimated to be 2,688 times as large as the Sun, and recently it was discovered to have a satellite whose bulk is said to be 7 times as great as that of our Sun. Again we quote from the Scientific American. The head of Taurus is brilliantly lighted by the V-shaped figure called Hyades, whose brightest star of the first magnitude is the celebrated Aldebaran. This star is red and of a deeper hue than Betelgeuse. In actual luminosity it about equals Sirius, but being much farther away appears less brilliant to us. It may be remarked that Rigel, or Beta Orionis, according to Newcomb's estimate, is immensely greater than Sirius and possibly exceeds the Sun in light 10,000 times. But its distance is too great to be measured with our present means. The comparing of these great suns to Earth sinks our Earth to the insignificance of a grain of sand. Yet, have we reason to believe that these bodies are the largest among the untold millions of worlds floating in space? We can form no conception of the size of these remote stars, and still less can we form a conception of the space which they occupy, because the space must be in proportion to the bodies occupying it, and because the distances are so much greater than anything with which we have to deal on Earth. In our flight across the vast void, the solar system is left behind as an island in space, and we find that we have traveled 250,000 times the radius of the Earth's orbit before we have reached the nearest fixed star, and from it no telescope yet invented could reveal a single one of the planets of our solar system. Stellar distances are so great that even astronomers find it impossible to handle the immense numbers, and consequently use the light year as a unit of measurement, which is the distance that light travels in a year, or about 63,000 times the distance of the Earth from the Sun. From terrestrial experiences, we have no conception of our distance from the Sun and can form but a faint idea by comparison. Charles A. Young, professor of astronomy at Princeton University, says that an explosion on the Sun would be heard by us about 14 years after it actually occurred. For years, investigations have been made to discover whether our sun with its system of worlds is not circling around another grander center. Some astronomers imagine that they find evidence indicating that our system is moving in a circular orbit around the star Alcyon of the Pleiades. Others tell us that the solar system is flying through space at the rate of about 11 miles per second toward the constellation Hercules, as the stars comprising that constellation appear to be spreading out as if we were approaching them. Again, an examination of the heavens shows the suns grouped together in galaxies, and there is evidence that these are in motion, but the distances are so immense that it is impossible for finite man to obtain positive knowledge of the order of their motion. Flammarion says, "To a mind which had the power of abstracting itself from time and space, the earth, the planets, the suns, the stars would seem to be falling like drops of rain from the boundless sky, in every imaginable direction, like raindrops whirled to and fro in the grasp of some cyclonic tempest and attracted, not by some solid base, but by the attractive force of each other and of them all. Each one of these cosmic drops, each of these worlds, these suns, is hurried along at such a rate of speed that the flight of a cannonball is mere repose in comparison. But may not this flying, falling in all directions appear similar to a great number of wheels with arms extended and revolving in the same direction? To one standing at a distance, the arms would appear to be flying in every imaginable direction. While some were going east, others would be going west. While some were going up, others would be going down, in apparent confusion, yet at the same time revolving around their centers in perfect order. Such is the order of the solar system with its planets and their satellites, and we may reasonably believe that that is the order of the whole universe. That there is an order there can be no doubt, because, if these great bodies flying through space were not governed by law, they would soon be destroyed. In the whole celestial sphere, the number of stars bright enough to be seen with the naked eye is only from 6,000 to 7,000, whereas, the number visible in the Great Lick telescope is probably 100 million, and Professor Young makes the remark that it shows stars so faint that it would take more than 30,000 to make a star equal to the faintest that can be seen with the naked eye. As to the number of these suns and systems, no astronomer can form a conception, for there are millions of suns with their systems within the reach of a powerful telescope. We are told that there are places in the Milky Way where the stars are so numerous that within the field of the telescope they appear so close together and so small that it is impossible to count them. And if within the field of the telescope the number is so great that they cannot be counted, what can we reasonably suppose to be the number comprising our universe? But if our mind palls in considering the immensity of the universe, yet, we must rally our forces, and, as the angel said to Daniel, be strong, yea, be strong. For we have been casting a survey over our own territory only, comparatively, our own dooryard. We turn the most powerful telescope into space beyond the limit of what is known as our universe, and under its powerful eye, little specks of nebulae form themselves into universes, remote from ours probably by millions of light years. In order to aid the mind in its marvelous flight through endless space, we append here from Flammarion's Wonders of Science a few illustrations of the appearance of these far-off universes, which are called nebulae. Here is our universe with suns and systems of worlds so remote that it would take tens of thousands of years for a ray of light traveling at the rate of 186,414 miles per second to reach the Earth. Yet it is only one sphere floating in limitless space, and beyond it there are other universes with numberless worlds, and beyond these, others, and so on without limit to space or to numbers of systems of worlds, or of universes. If there is no limit to space, then there is no conceiving the numbers of universes filling space. And here we must stop because of the inability of mind to grasp infinity. Asterisk the creator of the universe. Pause to think a moment. What has been your ideal of God, the creator of all these universes and systems of worlds? Is not the thought that has filled the minds of men for ages, that of a God in the form of a man, larger possibly than themselves, seated upon a throne somewhere in the universe, capable of creating and ruling these immense worlds, entirely inadequate? Can the Creator be less than His creation? All astronomers and philosophers unite in saying that all things in nature are ruled by law, or God. As the poet Pope has said, all are but parts of one stupendous whole, whose body nature is, and God the soul. That, changed through all, and yet in all the same. Great in the earth, as in the ethereal frame. Warms in the sun, refreshes in the breeze, glows in the stars, and blossoms in the trees, lives through all life, extends through all extent, spreads undivided, operates unspent, breathes in our soul, informs our mortal part, as full, as perfect, in a hair as heart, as full, as perfect, in vile man that mourns, as the rapt seraph that adores and burns. To him no high, no low, no great, no small. He fills, he bounds, connects, and equals all. How great, how incomprehensible, even from the point of view of the physical universe, is our God. From the physical point of view, man upon this little globe becomes, as it were, almost annihilated, a mere animalcule on a grain of sand. Yet we know that man is part of the great whole, part of that all-pervading spirit. God is spirit and God is love, and that spirit of love is flooding all these systems of worlds with his light and his love, loving and preserving all his diminutive children, and Yahweh, the will of the universe, is our God. In him we live and move and have our being. With every breath we draw we inhale that divine life, the fire of God's own supreme nature. As we move through space, the eternal substance of divinity passes through us as if we were but shadows, and it is only by the regenerate life that we can refine and intensify the currents of our life sufficiently to touch and to know something of the outermost degrees of divinity. If, in addition to what we have just said concerning worlds and universes, we accept the probability that universes with their peopled worlds have been in existence from all eternity and are destined to continue to all eternity, and that these people are progressing, just as man is progressing at the present time on our planet, growing in mind, becoming more and more refined and attenuated and spiritualized, what manner of men must exist within the limits of these universes at the present time? With our meager capacity for thought, if we should imagine for a moment that our sun was once a world like ours, born from a parent and inhabited with a people that have been in the process of evolutionary development all these hundreds of billions of years, would we be capable of grasping the greatness, the grandeur, and the glory of such beings? Would not one of these beings on our sun transcend even our highest imagination of God? Think of men who have lived and grown and are still living, growing and maturing on the parent sun of our sun. Again, upon its parent, and so on to infinity, and yet, all these are sons of God. With this thought in mind, can you for one moment think of this Almighty God, this wondrous God of the whole universe, and of all universes, as having been once confined, limited, within the personality of a single man? Even the man Jesus with all his divinity, his grandeur, glory and power. Reason recoils from such a thought. He was the Son of God. Yes, in a higher and a holier sense than the Church has understood. He said, I came out from God. Have we not all come out from God? Is God not the life, the fountain, from which all life is organized? Is not God the potentiality that causes the manifestation of law in the universe and in all universes? We ask these questions and allow the reader to answer them. Again, we ask the learned of our day who attribute all this manifestation to unthinking force moving in line with natural law. Can you conceive the cause of all these wondrous systems of worlds, the producer of all the inhabitants of all these numberless universes, to be without intelligence? If so, whence came the intelligence, small as it is, that you yourself possess? If you believe yourself to possess intelligence and deprive your source of the same conscious intelligence, are you not unreasonable? Certainly, you are. You would bring something out of nothing. Yes, the intelligence that you possess is but the merest shadow, the merest point of mind, and its source a thinking, knowing, loving intelligence, nourishing all those millions of systems of worlds and universes and their inhabitants, and organizing centers which are mind organs to carry forward the work of creating man in his image and likeness. And after all the research and with all the accumulation of facts regarding the heavens, since the remote time of Job to our own wonderful, present century, we are still able only to exclaim with him, Lo, these are parts of his ways. But how little a portion is heard of him. The thunder of his power who can understand? Footnotes. While Professor Young in his General Astronomy speaks disparagingly of the hypothesis of other universes beyond ours, yet at the same time he says that our universe is disc-shaped. The very fact that he gives our universe a form necessarily gives it a limit, for, if we could imagine a shape in the waters of the ocean, we would see at once that in doing so we would draw limits to separate a portion of water from all the rest. So in all thought of form, limitation is at once expressed, and we cannot believe that so eminent a man as Professor Young, or that any of our eminent astronomers can believe that this universe limited by 10,000 to 20,000 light-years of space, can be all there is in the infinitude of space. It would be like the ancients who, we are told, believed that our world was the only world in the universe. It would be only a little broader, page 80, thought to believe that our universe is the only universe there is in space. Of course, Professor Young may and probably does limit himself to that which he is able to see through the telescope, beyond which he knows nothing absolutely. But we cannot but suggest, because of reason, that while we do not believe in the nebular hypothesis, that the solar system was formed out of one mass of nebula, gas or stardust, yet that there is that which appears like nebula, through the most powerful telescope there is no doubt. But what would 1,000 or 1,000,000 suns like our sun appear like were they collected in a galaxy and separated in the distance of space by a few 100,000 light years? Would they not appear like a nebula? For our sun is a small one and we have no reason to say it is the smallest. There may be numerous suns no larger than our Earth floating out yonder in space. In short, there may be a universe floating in space composed of suns no larger than Mercury or the planetoids, which would appear through the most powerful telescope as mere stardust or nebula. So that it is evident that there is no certainty from what is seen through the telescope of the existence of such an element as nebula in space, notwithstanding the spectroscope indicates masses of gas, but our sun emits masses of gas. Therefore, notwithstanding the contradictions by eminent astronomers, we believe that the evidence remains sufficient for the statement that these nebula that are seen in space through the telescope are probably other universes remote from our universe, and there may be numbers of systems smaller even than our universe that would appear as nebula. The Christian believer will at once ask, are we not told in Col E. 9, that in him dwelleth all the fullness of the Godhead bodily? Yes, we believe that is true, and in a coming chapter on the Elohim, this thought is more fully explained. But we shall say here that the Godhead to whom the apostle referred is identical with the Father of the Lord Jesus Christ, of whom Christ often spoke and to whom he called at the time of his crucifixion, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. Which is, being interpreted, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? Eli is the singular form of the word Elohim, and one of the Elohim, who are the God of the solar system, was personified, manifested in and through the person of the Lord Jesus Christ. This will be made perfectly clear in the following chapters. End of chapter 7. Next, chapter 8. The great name, Yahweh. We have seen in preceding chapters that the physicists have searched diligently into the character and nature of matter from a physical standpoint, but in their last analysis, viz. their investigations into the molecule, atom, ion, and electron, and their deductions that, after all, the smallest particles of matter may be only centers of force, they have invaded the realm of the metaphysical. At this point, the physicist stops to look around him for a base, a substantial foundation, to which he may unite his forces with the metaphysicians in pursuit of causation. If we assume the task to find that base, that center, and herein present it, it will necessitate investigations into that broad field of thought that has been denominated revelation, as well as investigations into nature. We have assumed the existence of God, of an intelligent, creative mind power that is able to cause to be, and, as we shall see in following chapters, to bring into existence mind centers to be the expression of its own nature, in other words, mind centers through which this universal mind expresses itself. Theology has gathered around the word revelation so much debris that it is necessary first to clear away the rubbish in order to get at the real meaning. Revelation in its essence means simply an angel hand placing in a dark and dangerous passage a bright light. From this we assume that there is an angel, an intelligent being, who would cause us to know that which is necessary to be known in order that we may avoid pitfalls and dangerous errors, and that our mind may grow into the divine likeness, into the likeness of its source. If we were passing through a dark and dangerous passage, and a hand placed there a light, should we, like the moth, be so absorbed in the existence of the light, that we stumble and fall and perhaps destroy ourselves? No. As intelligent beings understanding the use of light, instead of looking at the lamp, we look around us and examine our pathway, and the light reveals to us the condition that surrounds us. This, then, is an illustration of what revelation is, and all revelation from the beginning of the world down to the present time is nothing more, nothing less, than a light in a dark place. One of the greatest lights that has ever been set in this dark world is the revelation of the meaning of the great name of God. Modern usage gives a mere word sound to represent an object, but in divine order a name expresses quality. In the meaning of the great name of God is the light that illuminates that dark passage between the material world and the world of metaphysics, or the world of mind. The great name of God was known from the earliest history of man to the time when Moses was called to deliver Israel from Egyptian bondage. But, like the name of the present day, it was to those early people only a word sound or an appellation referring to a certain deity. But when Moses was commissioned to deliver Israel, he was not given the name only, but he was given to know the meaning also, as we shall see further on. The name Yahweh, translated Jehovah a few times, occurs many times throughout the Hebrew Scriptures and is translated Lord and God. But in order to distinguish the name of God from the other names of God in the Authorized Version, the translators have nearly always put it in capitals. Concerning the name Yahweh, we give the following references. And God said unto Moses, I will be that I will be. And he said, Thus shalt thou say unto the children of Israel, I will be hath sent me unto you. Exodus 14. Rabbi Leeser's translation. And God said unto Moses, I am that I am, Heb. Ehia Asher Ehia. And he said, Thus shalt thou say unto the children of Israel, I am hath sent me unto you. That this passage is intended to indicate the etymology of Jehovah as understood by the Hebrews, no one has ventured to doubt. It is in fact the key to the whole mystery. But, though it certainly supplies the etymology, the interpretation must be determined from other considerations. Jehovah must be the third person, singular, masculine, future, of the substantive verb haya to be. We accept Yahweh as the more probable punctuation. Dictionary of the Bible, by Dr. William Smith. Although we may not be able to give with perfect certainty the literal meaning of this name, yet at least we will no longer designate it by the barbarous form, Jehovah, which was produced only 3 centuries ago through Christian aggravation of a Jewish superstition, but we will restore its real sound Haveh, were it only as a sign that Hebrew antiquity is now springing up among us out of the grave of ages, endowed with fresh life. Heinrich Ewald. History of Israel, translated by Russell Martineau. So far as the interests of criticism are concerned, all scholars are now agreed. Gesenius and Ewald on the side of philologists, Hengstenberg, Tholick, Lutz, etc., on the side of theologians, are united for once. They all agree in giving it the form Yahweh in the future tense, as its literal rendering. Yahweh Christ, by Alexander McWhorter. These quotations show that scholars are to a great extent agreed as to the pronunciation of the name, that some have even discovered its true surface meaning, and that the name relates to the one God, the God of the universe, the all-pervading Spirit. We read in Exodus 13, 14, and 15. And Moses said unto God, Behold, when I come unto the children of Israel, and shall say unto them, The God of your fathers hath sent me unto you, and they shall say unto me, What is his name? What shall I say unto them? And God said unto Moses, I will be what I will to be. And he said, Thus shalt thou say unto the children of Israel, I will be what I will to be hath sent me unto you. And God said moreover unto Moses, Thus shalt thou say unto the children of Israel, The Lord God, Yahweh Elohim, of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, hath sent me unto you. This is my name forever, and this is my memorial unto all generations. The 14th verse is intended to present to Moses the true signification of the divine name, the name of the all-pervading, all-intelligent God of all the universe, but the words capitalized and translated in the Authorized Version, I am that I am, are given in the Revised Version of the Old Testament in 3 different ways, namely, I am because I am, or, I am who I am, or, I will be that I will be. The last form is undoubtedly the most nearly correct. Surely, to anybody that accepts the Scriptures as authority, the words, This is my name forever and this is my memorial unto all generations, are plain enough that this is the name, and the only name, applying to God, and that all other forms are incorrect. There are many evidences that this name began to be known to other nations about the time of Moses, and in the 4th verse of the 2nd chapter of Genesis the name occurs the first time. Then what may we understand as the meaning of the words in Exodus v. 2 and 3? And God spake unto Moses, and said unto him, I am Yahweh. And I appeared unto Abraham, unto Isaac, and unto Jacob, by the name of God Almighty, Heb. El Shaddai. But by my name Yahweh was I not known to them. And we take the meaning of the word, Yahweh, as, I will be what I will to be. It brings to us a potentiality, a power, all unknown to the world, even at the present time. For the name carries with it the thought that he who spoke the word and caused the world to form and to produce itself by the potency of that infinite mind, did so by the power of his will, and when we as creatures of earth muse much upon the signification of that name, the I will, and the second part of it, to be what I will to be, or, as I will to be, we get a realization of that unlimited power, and a certainty that there is no power in the world, nay, in the universe, but the power of the will. Since it is accepted by the Christian world that man is the offspring of the Almighty, it follows that man, being made in the image of God, has attributes similar to those of his Creator, his Father. When man's will has been surrendered, yea, rather has been united to the divine will, then man and God become one, for the mind of man is nothing. It has no power of action without the will. Man always does that which he wills to do, although sometimes there are found in the man two wills active at the same time, the will of the flesh, or the will arising from the impulses, desires, and passions, and a will that arises from the conclusions of the reasoning faculties. But whatever will controls the person, that the person is for the time being, for the will decides all that a person is. If we accept the statement that each organ of the brain is the seat of a separate faculty, then we may say that all the faculties of the brain are like a congress of persons in conference one with another, and that the will, the supreme power, positioned in the center and upper part of the brain, is the king or president, the executor of the decisions of all the faculties. In the same manner we may say that the divine will is King of kings and Lord of lords. It is the potency that holds all worlds and systems of worlds in their places, that governs all life upon them, and that gives direction and potentiality to all forms of existence and to all laws manifested in nature. It is because of this that man in his return to God is taught to pray, "Let thy will be done," or in other words, this prayer means that the desire of the heart must be that the will of the finite become the will of the infinite. When man has become absolutely subordinate to the divine will, then it will be correct to say of him, as was said of the angel that was sent to Aaron when the children of Israel were about to enter the promised land, "My name is in him," for, as soon as the man unites his will, his desire, and his purpose in life with God, he is one with him, God's name is in him, God's will is his will, he moves under the potentiality and power of that will, and to all intents and purposes the will becomes the man. In other words, the infinite mind and its conclusions, which are the purpose concerning man in the creation of the world, become the will of the man. Thus man becomes the manifestation of God, of Yahweh. As we shall see hereafter, those who were wholly consecrated to God and had reached high attainments in their unity with the Father were called Yahweh by Moses. Jesus, the Christ, said, "I and my Father are one." We know that our Christian brethren, thinking upon this without further light, have concluded that Christ was one of the triune Godheads. That is true because God has a threefold manifestation. First, as the Father or producer of all that is, the Creator. Second, as the Holy Spirit, translated the Holy Ghost, the active agency. Third, as manifested in human form, the Son of God. We read of Christ that he was manifest that he might bring many sons unto God. Again he said in regard to that oneness in his notable prayer, "Neither praise I for these alone, but for them also which shall believe on me through their word, that they all may be one, as thou, Father, art in me, and I in thee, that they also may be one in us." Here Jesus makes it plain that there are not many gods, but one, but that there are many manifestations of God in the form of his sons. But as soon as a man becomes truly a son of God, his will becomes one with the Father's will, thus they are no more two, but one. For all there is of life, of existence, of being, is the mind, for God produced all things by a word, viz. A thought formed in the mind, a decision reached and sent out. By the force of the will, endowing the thought form with potentiality capable of working out and bringing into manifestation the thing decided upon. Jesus was the last messenger who stood before the world as the ultimate embodiment of that creative word, a finished man, a son of God, a man in whom God was incarnated and through whom he found complete expression, as Christ said, "I can do nothing of myself, the Father that dwelleth in me, he doth the works." Thus the name of God is the name of the divine attribute or active agency that produced all manifestation and lies beyond, beneath, and overrules all action. Here words fail to express fully the deep, comprehensive meaning of that great name, but he that would be wise and strong and godlike should muse much upon the signification of this wondrous name of the God of the universe, Yahweh. The "I will be what I will be." We have here endeavored to give a little of the history of that wondrous name and of its relatedness to the active agency in the human organism, but the world is in the habit of looking to authority, and if the authority for a thought, according to its judgment, is found insufficient, the thought is thrown aside as worthless. But we wish to impress upon the reader that the authority for this name in itself amounts to nothing. We have likened revelation to a light. Mere authority has no light in it, but the thought embodied in the word formation is the light. In carefully examining our own bodies we find that we cannot move a muscle without the consent of the will. We find also that while physiologists discourse very learnedly about the mechanical structure of the voluntary and involuntary muscles of the human organism, yet the real factor is not understood. What physiologist has been able to describe the modus operandi of the mind and the will upon the muscular system? A dead body has no power to use its muscles. Electricians have experimented upon the bodies of men just executed and have been able to cause them to throw their limbs about in a reckless, uncertain manner, but they applied a power outside of and beyond the power of the mind. This power had no knowledge or order to guide it. Experiment with your own body. Take hold of an object weighing 10, 20, or 50 pounds and lift it by bending your arm. Observe carefully where the power comes from. By careful observation, you will find that the power is in the brain, and by still more careful analysis you will find that the power is in the will. We will, and then we act, or we will to act. Herein is a manifestation of the name of God and our own organism. Whence did we get that willpower, that power to act? From the creative source, did we not? Certainly. As we look out into the broad realm of nature, we see the noble horse pulling a great load. We see his muscles contract and expand. What power is it that is pulling the load? Yahweh, the will of the universe. This power is one manifestation of the great name. But as we shall consider in succeeding chapters its manifestation in all its wondrous ramifications, we wish here only to impress upon the mind of the reader the force and function of the will, of that revealed power, the I will be what I will to be. End of chapter 8. The goal of life. Next, chapter 9. The manifestation of Yahweh. The goal of life, or science and revelation. By H. E. Butler. Brought to you by Masonic Audiobook Library, read by Kwame Agyare. In the preceding chapter we considered the great name, Yahweh, I will be what I will to be, from its historic point of view. We will now endeavor to consider it in its manifestation in, and in its relation to mind exhibited in the human organism, and also in its great, general manifestation throughout the known and the unknown universe. It is manifested in the human organism as will. In the will of man resides his only power, and may we not ask, is there any known power in the whole universe that is not will power? What means this wondrous activity in everything? In the small and in the great, in the telescopic and in the microscopic, in what is infinitely beyond the microscopic as well as what is infinitely beyond the telescopic. We quote the following from Camille Flammarion. Thus stars, suns, planets, worlds, comets, shooting stars, aerolites, all the bodies that compose this vast universe, in a word, are resting, not on solid bases, as seemed to be demanded by the primitive and childish conceptions of our ancestors, but on the invisible and immaterial forces which rule and direct their motions. These millions and millions of heavenly bodies are endowed with their respective motions for the sake of stability and are mutually supported by each other across the gulf that separates them. In fact, the entire cortege is moving, flying, falling, rolling, rushing through space, but at such relative distances that all appear to be at rest. Now the constitution of the sidereal universe is formed on the same model as that of bodies which we designate as material. All bodies, organic or inorganic, man, animal, plant, stone, iron, bronze, are composed of molecules that are perpetually in motion and never touch. These molecules are themselves composed of atoms which do not touch. Each of these atoms is infinitely small and invisible, not only to the eye, not only to the microscope, but even to the thought, since it is possible that these atoms may be nothing more than centers of force. The calculation has been made that in the head of a pin there are no less than 8 sextillions of atoms, or 8,000 times 1,000 millions multiplied by 1,000 million, and that in a cubic centimeter of air there is a sextillion of molecules. All these atoms, all these molecules, are in motion under the influence of directing forces, and, relatively to their dimensions, are separated from each other by wide distances. We may even believe that there is in principle but one description of atoms, and that it is the number of primitive atoms, essentially simple and homogeneous, their manner of arrangement and their motion which determine the diversity of molecules. A molecule of gold or iron differing from a molecule of sulfur, of oxygen, of hydrogen, etc., only in the number, the disposition and the motion of the primitive atoms of which it is composed, each molecule being a system, a microcosm. Whatever idea we may adopt, however, of the essential constitution of bodies, the truth that is recognized today and cannot henceforth be contested is, that the motionless point that our imagination has been seeking has no existence anywhere. Archimedes may vainly clamor for a place to stand so that he may move the world. Worlds, like atoms, repose on the invisible, on immaterial force. Everything is in motion, solicited by the force of attraction and as if in search of that motionless point which flies from us as we pursue it and which has no existence, since in the infinite the center is everywhere and nowhere. The so-called positivists, who declare with so much assurance that matter alone reigns with its properties, and who smile with disdain upon the researches of thinking men, should first tell us what they mean by that famous word, matter. If they did not stop at the surface of things, if they had any idea that appearances may serve as a cloak for intangible realities, they would doubtless be a little more modest. As for ourselves, who seek the truth with no preconceived ideas and unbiased in favor of any system, it seems to us that the essence of matter remains to us as mysterious as the essence of force, the visible universe being something entirely different from the form under which it presents itself to our senses. In fact, this visible universe is composed of invisible atoms. It rests in apparently void space, and the forces which guide and direct it are themselves immaterial and invisible. It would be a less daring speculation to affirm that matter has no existence, that all is dynamism, than to pretend to declare the existence of a universe that is exclusively material. As to the material support of the world, it is a sufficiently piquant remark to make that it disappeared at exactly the same time that the science of mechanics gained its victories, proclaiming the triumph of the invisible. The highest effort of our intelligence has for its last resting place, for its supreme reality, the infinite. When Flammarion wrote this, it was considered very fanciful, but physicists, by experimenting with radioactive substances, have discovered many things concerning the atom which less than 30 years ago they were unable to prove by a single scientific experiment. The atom has always been considered indestructible and indivisible, using Flammarion's language, too small for thought, but the doctrine of the immutability of the atom, which has held sway for almost 2,000 years, has ceased to exist. Sir Oliver Lodge says, "It is noteworthy how very small these electrical particles smaller than atoms, called electrons, are compared with the atoms of matter to which they are attached. If an electron is represented by a sphere an inch in diameter, the diameter of an atom of matter on the same scale is 1.5 miles. An atom is not a large thing, but if composed of electrons, the spaces between them are enormous compared with their size, as great relatively as the spaces between the planets in the solar system, and it becomes a reasonable hypothesis to surmise that the whole of the atom may be built up of positive and negative electrons interleaved together. The oppositely charged electrons are to be thought of in this hypothesis as flying about inside the atom, as a few thousand specks like full stops, periods, might fly about inside this hall, forming a kind of cosmic system under their strong mutual forces, and occupying the otherwise empty region of space which we call the atom, occupying it in the same sense that a few scattered but armed soldiers can occupy a territory, occupying it by forceful activity, not by bodily bulk, or according to Lord Kelvin, rotating with inconceivable velocity. The hypothesis of Flammarion and many other eminent scientists, that the atom may be nothing but a center of force, seems to have been proved by Professor Rutherford of Montreal. He has shown that the main fact of radioactivity consists in the throwing away with great violence actual atoms of matter, such as may be stopped by a thin sheet of paper. Of this Sir Oliver Lodge says, "Their speed, indeed, far exceeds that of any cannonball that ever existed, being as much faster than a cannonball as that is faster than a snail's crawl, 100 times faster than the fastest flying star. These atomic projectiles constitute the fastest moving matter known. There is every reason to believe that a minute scrap of radium, scarcely perceptible to the eye, may go on emitting these energetic projectiles for hundreds of years. And our experience coincides with Sir Oliver's, that whatever hypothesis and speculation we may frame, we cannot exceed the reality in genuine wonder, and believe that the simplicity and beauty of the truth concerning even the material universe, when we know it, will be such as to elicit feelings of reverent awe and adoration." Using a very different process of investigation from what these noted physicists have used, we have reached the same conclusion, namely, that what we call matter is in reality composed of invisible substance, and what we call the atom is only a tremendous reservoir of energy. Even as far back as the time of Descartes, we find that he rejected the atomic hypothesis, holding that there could be no vacuum in the universe, and making matter essentially synonymous with extension. The most illustrious of our modern physicists, Lord Kelvin, considers ether as an elastic solid filling all space. If the huge cables that hold up the East River Bridge in New York are composed of atoms each revolving in its sphere as the planets and suns of the universe, and each atom in itself is a minute solar system comprising a central part, around which 1,000 or many more particles revolve, then the questions arise. What is the great strength holding up that mighty structure? What is the power that holds those cables together? What is this apparently solid substance composing the bridge? Why do these electrons always hold their orderly positions? What is this invisible ether through which they fly with such inconceivable velocity? To answer, we are thrown back upon the revelation of that great name, namely, the power of the great name, the will, the I will be what I will to be. The same question may be asked concerning all material substances, but there is no response from modern research but the echoing question, what is it? If we take the Bible revelation, namely, that God, in the beginning, created the heaven and the earth, and again that God created these things by a word, we then conclude that all is mind, spirit. We know that a word is the expression of a thought sent out by the will, endowed with the potentiality of the will. In the creation of the world, this word must have been endowed with the potentiality of the spirit, the will, Yahweh. The word had the power in itself to make a world make itself. For, from scientific investigation, it has been shown that there is a general trend to the formative processes in all nature. For example, the tiny seed germ in the earth has in it the power to gather to itself material to construct a body according to its kind, character, and quality, and this body, like all other bodies, has the power to hold its own structural integrity. The body of man, which is constantly undergoing a material change, still holds its form until the will fails, or is overcome by a stronger force, then death comes. What is death? We say it is the absence of life. Yes. What is life? This has been the question of all the ages, and the answer has never been found. Why? Because there is no comparison. Life is, and there is nothing like it. In the scriptures God said, I am, and there is none like unto me, and if God, the soul of the universe, is life, life is, and there is nothing like it. And since we can know the qualities of things only by comparison and there is nothing with which to compare life, it is impossible to answer the question. What is life? Tennyson realized this truth when he wrote these beautiful lines. Flower in the crannied wall, I pluck you out of the crannies. Hold you here, root and all, in my hand, little flower. But if I could understand what you are, root and all in all, I should know what God and man is. In trying to answer the question, what is life? We cannot stop with organized life as we know it, for there is abundant evidence that all space and all substance is filled with quivering, dancing, sparkling life. Inanimate matter, a phrase much used 25 years ago, has now given place to the life of matter. M. Bose, whose ingenious experiments we have before mentioned, has shown that matter reveals more and more the qualities which were formerly attributed to living beings only. Gustave Le Bon says, physiologists measure, as is well known, the sensitiveness of a being by the degree of excitation necessary in order to obtain from it a reaction. The being is considered very sensitive when it acts under slight stimuli. Applying similar tests to brute matter, we can show that the most rigid substance and the least sensitive in appearance, a bar of metal, for example, is really incredibly sensitive. We know that when the body dies, something leaves it. The materialists say that the life dies, but whom shall we believe? The materialists, who are few in number compared with those who believe in spirit, or the great majority of mankind that believe in the existence of the soul after the dissolution of the body? The very scientific materialism of our day, writes Professor Hyslop, in the North American Review, points definitely to the possibility, or at least the rationality of supposing the possibility, of a future life. Physical science admits the existence of a supersensible world of reality which had not been suspected or proved until within recent years. We may instance Röntgen rays, the various forms of radioactive energy whose whole gamut is not yet known, and the speculations about ions and electrons that take us far beyond the world of Lucretian atoms into the measureless ether, whose properties make it impossible to apply the term matter to it, without removing the antagonism of matter to the spiritual. All these discoveries represent realities quite as supersensible as the Christian conception of the immaterial, and we escape calling them spiritual only because the development of human thought has come to confine the connotation of spirit to implications of consciousness as its necessary and only function. It is this and this alone that prevents us from claiming that the outcome of physical science is the proof of a spiritual world. We have so defined the nature and problem of spirit as implicative of personal consciousness that there can be no proof of its reality apart from the animal organism and its functions until we show that consciousness and personal identity can survive death. All that the discovery of supersensible forms of energy proves is that the limitations of reality are not confined to the material world as we directly know it, but that there may be vast regions of energy which can be inferred or known only by its effects in the physical cosmos. I am satisfied that more than 3/4 of all men and women have had positive proof, if they would accept it, of the existence of spirit. I say positive proof if they would accept it, because skepticism has become so popular and universal that men have been taught to deny their own senses, but among those that are not ready to deny the evidence of their own senses are a great majority who in their hearts can say, I know there is such a thing as spirit existence, and even those who claim to be the strongest materialists have evidence within themselves that they are wrong. Yes, everything has life. All life is motion, and it is the life in the body that keeps the body intact, supports it, and maintains it. And if we examine carefully this life, not only in our body, but in everything that is, we find even the smallest insect and plant acting according to the law of mind, evidencing that it thinks or that thought is active in it. If this be true, then can we help concluding that all is mind? Then we justify the scriptural declaration that God by mind, by a word, created the world. In examining our own minds, we find we have reasons for action, but however powerful the thoughts or reasons may be, unless we will to act, we remain motionless. Then the will to act seems to be another quality in us, which quality, when called into action by the other faculties of the mind, tenses the muscles, and causes motion. We will to act. This again brings us to the revelation of the name of the infinite, Yahweh, the I will be what I will to be, or the will of the universe. Since we are dependent upon our own will for the power to act, then is not action, no matter in what form it may be found, the result of the power of will. Again, according to the strength of a man's will is the strength of his body. Let a man become angry, see how the red blood obeys the mandates of his will. Men have often been heard to say, "When I am angry, I am stronger than under any other circumstances." What is anger? It is the excitement of the will. In the ordinary individual, the will may be excited to such an extent that it actually controls the intellect, and when this power is sufficiently excited to take control of the reasoning powers, then we say the individual has lost his reason, or he is mad. It is the function of all will power to obey the intellect, in other words, to be a servant, but when the understanding is set aside by the will, then evil is manifest. Since these things are true, is there any evil in the world except that resulting from the will dominating the intellect? We believe not. Let us return to the potentiality of the will. We have seen that the strength of man depends upon the strength of will, and if Yahweh is the will of the universe, then he or it is the strength of all that is. We know that when the mind leaves the body rapidly disintegrates, that so long as the will and all the faculties of the mind are kept active, the body is healthy, strong, and vigorous. What is it that holds together the atoms or centers of force in the body of man, in the mighty cable, in the great beam, in the keen edge of the sword? As we look at these objects and examine them with our senses, we cannot but believe that they are dense, hard, and solid. Since they are not, what is it that appears dense, hard, and solid in this seething, moving mass? Is it not the same power that enables you to reach out your arm and lay hold of a weight of 25, 50 or 100 pounds and lift it by bending your arm? You will, and the arm moves and lifts ponderable objects. Then it is the will that moves the arm, is it not? Since God is the creator of all things, the power of the universe, and his name is Yahweh, I will be what I will to be, and since all is life and that life is served by the will, then the strength of your arm, of that piece of steel, of that beam, of that mighty cable, is the strength of the will of the page 110 infinite. It is the manifestation of the will, Yahweh. From the solution of the infinitely small, may we not arrive at the solution of the infinitely great? In the limitless universe, the same will holds all worlds, suns, and systems in their place. Since all is life, boundless, quivering, moving, active life, and since what we call individualized substances, a piece of steel, a crystal, a plant, an animal, a man, are individualized centers of thought, and since all these centers of thought and forces unite to make up one grand body that we call our planet, and since our planet Earth is only one electron, as it were, of our solar system, which is a great, grand atom, and since our universe is made up of multitudes of these atoms, then is it not possible that multitudes of universes make one great body? We are told that there are no bounds to space, that there is no limit to God's universe, so we may reasonably conclude that all these universes are molecules, as it were, making up one grand body, and this body is the life, the substance of divinity, that all these universes are governed by the indwelling mind which we call God, that all the movements of the heavenly bodies, as well as earthly bodies, telescopic as well as microscopic, are by virtue of the infinite will? The strength in the cable is the strength of the Almighty will, the strength, the power, that gives to everything its bounds. He gave to the sea its bound, that the waters should not pass his commandment. Prov. v. 29, RV, page 111, paragraph continues. Therefore the revelation that the name of the Almighty is Yahweh, the I will be what I will to be, has furnished a conception by which we may form at least an idea of the all-pervading mind and executive will of the God of all systems, if not universes. We know something of the actions of will in the body. Is something the matter with the foot? The mind takes cognizance of it and sends to the foot will power. How does it send that will from the head to the extremities of the body? Can you tell us? We may talk of nerve force, of electric currents, and so on, but how little we know of that which we call electricity. We see a man who lives a highly moral life, so filled with electricity that by a little friction he can light the gas with his fingers, and this force asterisk seems to be the same that has been harnessed to run our railroads, and to serve in our various industries, and this will, Yahweh, the God of the universe, may express page 112, paragraph continues, himself, itself, from one end of the universe to the other, by the agency that we call electricity, or some element to us more subtle, and caused to be or not to be according to infinite law, in the same way that we take charge of and control our own bodies. Thus, in considering Yahweh to be the God and power of the universe, we may safely say that as in the minute, man, the microcosm, so in God the macrocosm. The mind that fills all space, all worlds, all systems, the one God, the one mind, the one force, making up all that we call separate individuals, or universes. The quotations in this chapter come from the ablest minds of our time, and they unite in proving that the best thoughts of the age come to about the same conclusions that revelation came to centuries ago, and they thus give circumstantial proof of the truth of revelation. They also give evidence that the human mind, if left free to act from its higher self, is led by that higher and spiritual individuality to the same conclusions that were announced by prophets and seers in the ages past. The only thing that now remains is for the scientists to recognize the language. For now, science and revelation meet as strangers from a far country, but one day they will meet as friends. Then they will see eye to eye and rejoice in the mutual light of each other's mentality, a light which neither can claim as all his own. Footnotes. There is another force in nature that acts very much like electricity. It will give a spark of light, but has in it no heat. This is as yet a comparatively unknown force. It acts quicker than electricity and is as much stronger and as much more potential than electricity as electricity is more potential than water. This marvelous force is interior to all the forces that we thus far know and utilize, and is waiting the higher development of our race for its discovery and utilization. It fills all space, and is next beyond electricity in ethereality, and is the most potent of any element that can be made sensible to the human consciousness. As it evidently governs the action of electricity, we have given it the name of electro-archon in order that the thought of it may have a standing in the minds of the people. End of chapter 9. The Goal of Life or Science and Revelation. By H. E. Butler. Brought to you by Masonic Audiobook Library. Read by Kwame Agyare. Next. Chapter 10 Mind Centers. We read in Genesis that God created man in his own image, in the image of God created he him. We know that the image of a thing is the form, the general order, the construction, the external appearance, of that thing. With regard to the construction of matter, the opinion of some scientists is that it is constituted of centers of force. Now, in considering the name Yahweh, we have presented reasons for believing that all force is by virtue of that which in human manifestation, our manifestation in connection with human mind, is called the will. But the will being simply a force acting in obedience to the thought, and thought being form and order, then, to the end that there may be order in any form, there must be a mind to direct the force, for in all nature's activity order is the direct manifestation of mind. In other words, the existence of a center of mind activity implies an organization in which is embodied a will, or power of action, and a mind to cause that action to maintain specific orderly arrangement. In all ages past, the order, precision, and limitless page 114 power, manifested in the movements of planets, suns, and systems of worlds, have been the wonder of thinking men. But if, as we have concluded, all is mind and all is the product of the creative word, then we are compelled to recognize in all these activities of the universe the functioning of mind. See yonder shining world in space, flying with inconceivable velocity in obedience to the law that governs its every action to the utmost minutiae. Let us approach that world. As we near it, we behold green fields, beautiful gardens, extensive railroads and steamships and magnificent irrigating systems. We hear the roar of millions of activities. Are they the activities of intelligent, thinking beings? We carry with us an electric receiver, and as we draw still nearer we listen to the tick, tick of that receiver, and lo, we find mind emanating from a people who communicate with each other through space and talk intelligently of their interests, their designs and purposes. The nearer we approach them, the more we see that they are all governed by some definite law of action. While each individual seems intent on carrying out his own will and design, yet his will is interdependent upon that of his millions of associates. Thus, as one has said, no man liveth unto himself, for no man is independent of all other men, but every man, as a molecule in the great body of humanity, is dependent upon the thought and page 115 action of the entire body for his guidance, maintenance, support, and general integrity. As we view this beautiful world floating in space, we cannot but see that the ultimating laws and forces active therein are manifested in an intelligent, thinking humanity, and we can but conclude that the world that has produced this humanity, this intelligence, must be a body of mind element. As we visit world after world and find in each great diversity, and yet great unity inasmuch as they are all peopled with intelligent, thinking, acting, willing humanities, we can but conclude that the bodies of these humanities are mind centers brought into manifestation by their controlling center which holds in unity all its worlds, controls their every action and keeps them ever revolving through space around itself, their governing center. These facts are at least suggestive of what revelation brings to our mind in the declaration made in Genesis 26, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness." In contemplating this text we find its equivalent in this declaration. Let us create an additional mind center to be manifested among worlds, and let this mind center have dominion over its world, over the fish of the sea, the fowl of the air, and over all the earth. Or, let this mind center be king absolute, ruling the whole constituent of its planet, all nature below it. We have concluded, from our understanding of scientific research, that there is order in everything, from the microscopic to the telescopic, and that order follows a definite law. Therefore we may with very little difficulty discover in man the constitution of the whole body of humanity, he being composed of organs like, yet dissimilar to, the members of all organized life, a microcosm of the macrocosm. So that each individual is a mind center, a mind organ, and when scientists conclude that the atom, or electron, may be but a center of force, shall we not add, may be a world in itself, a mind center? But here we enter the realm of speculation, through the door of analogy, however. In a preceding chapter we touched on the thought that Yahweh, the God of the universe, or of all exaverses, is spirit, and is the all-pervading formless former of all things. We shall now consider his image, which is seen in the unity of all organized life. Every organized form, all organized substance, from the most material to the most ethereal, is organized by thought and bears the likeness to its progenitor that the son bears to his father, and is not only the image and likeness of its father, but is the embodiment and expression of its father, being of the father's life and mind and possessing his attributes, so far as the form is able to receive them. Thus all manifest nature becomes the body of the infinite, becomes a mind center to express the thoughts of the thinking intelligence that pervades and interpervades all space, all worlds, and systems of worlds. If we accept as a fact, and how can we do otherwise, that all manifestations of life are mind organs of the infinite, then we find a vast field of interesting thought concerning the purpose of God in the creation of man in his image and likeness. From the foregoing we infer that the whole universe is working together under one controlling will, working toward one general and well-defined object. And therefore when God said, "Let us make man in our image and likeness," it was, as it were, the infinite source of all formative law finding intelligent expression in a mind center which was capable of thinking, knowing and sending forth thought-forming power of such character and potency as to form a world and cause that world to bring forth intelligent beings who were to become its absolute rulers. But man, in order to possess this dominion, must have not only the image, but the likeness of his creator. Humanity, the image now existing on this planet, is the product of creative law, as is evidenced by his subordination to that law. But when the likeness is obtained, then will man no longer act blindly under the impulse of law, but he will have awakened to a state of knowing. This state of ultimate knowing was intimated by our Lord when he said to his disciples, "No longer do I call you servants, for the servant knoweth not what his Lord doth, but I have called you friends, for all things that I heard from my Father I have made known unto you." He here brings out the thought, dimly, it is true, that all organized life, man included, is under the absolute dominion of creative law, is a servant, is a mind center acted upon by that law, without absolute volition, with but partial volition, limited by the organic qualities and the general form which govern the desires, loves and sympathies, and, consequently, the decisions of the will. Thus man is in the image of God and as yet is a servant, controlled by a mind, a will, of which he knows comparatively nothing. And if our conclusion is correct that man, by acting under the impulse of a higher intelligence, is being led through evolutionary processes toward the estate of a volitional, intelligent being, and if this law is universal, then it follows that the higher planets, the elder worlds, must have reached a point where the body politic is not only in the image of God, but has attained to a degree of his likeness, of his purity, of his comprehensive knowledge and of his volitionary dominion over all below, is a mind organ for the infinite to fill. And our sun, at least in its physical manifestation, may contain a luminous humanity whose very bodies are a flaming fire, and who have reached such a degree of likeness to the Father as to have attained the right, through mental and spiritual unfoldment, to have dominion over all below them, and having this dominion over that which is below them constitutes them God. V. 1. And if the inhabitants of our Father-Mother world, the Sun, are the God of the worlds that they have created, then are not they, in their turn, the children of a higher world, of their parent Sun? And thus may we not see in the heavens the great spiritual nervous system of an individual man, having centers of mind beyond centers of mind, as in our physical structure, there being one center transcendently above all others, ruling all below it. For we find from careful study of our own body that, while we have a brain center, the head, from which all voluntary action emanates, yet there is another brain center, some think it is the solar plexus, which governs all involuntary action, such as digestion and the tearing down and the rebuilding of the body. And there is in the experience of many, a consciousness of a mind center transcendently beyond this, so high, so spiritual, that probably no one has been able fully to comprehend or locate its power. Many have started out in search of the soul, but it has ever eluded them. And if in our own organism we find that which is transcendently beyond our comprehension, there may be worlds that have become so spiritualized as to be beyond the perception of worlds upon lower planes of existence. Therefore, in our contemplation of universal law, we come to the conclusion that the words recorded in our Bible, "Let us make man in our image," etc., are eternal words. Words that have been traversing the infinitude of space through all eternity and will continue to traverse it to all eternity, or so long as organic form finds expression, so long as the creative mind continues to form organized mind centers through which to express itself in some well-defined direction. For truly we see in nature that every organized form has what we call a specific character. Even among men we find that each man has his own peculiar character and sphere of use, the sphere wherein he is normal. Consequently, God in his infinite purpose is not creating worlds to float in space without a definite purpose, but every organized form is made to be a mind center, a mind organ of the infinite, through which to express some useful thought. And when man has awakened to a realization of his place in the universe, to the object of his creation, and has voluntarily united his will with the will of the All-Mind, and has complied with the laws of his being, then he will awaken to find God manifested in him, and to find also that that manifestation of God in him is one with the Spirit of the Infinite manifested in all diversified character and form throughout the universe, and, so far as his organization and sphere of use make it possible, he will be enabled to know all that is relative to his plane of existence. And recognizing his position as a mind organ of the infinite, he will realize the force of the words expressed by the Nazarene, "All authority hath been given unto me in heaven and on earth." But the full manifestation of this authority and dominion, this image and likeness, is obtained only through organization, correct formation in harmony with universal law. This organization we shall consider later on, in the chapter on the Elohim, and elaborate in the chapter on the eternal order of Melchizedek, and further formulate and elaborate in the chapters on the image of God, and the likeness of God, and consummate in the image and the likeness. The Goal of Life or Science and Revelation, by H. E. Butler. Brought to you by Masonic Audiobook Library, read by Kwame Agyare. Next. Chapter 11. The Elohim. It was the Elohim that the Lord Jesus called his Father, and he made the astonishing statement that no man knoweth the Son, but the Father. Neither knoweth any man the Father, save the Son, and he to whomsoever the Son will reveal him. Matt. She. 27. In the effort to reveal the Father, we necessarily assume thereby to be the Son, which does not mean that we assume to have in mind the Lord Jesus Christ who was here 1900 years ago, for the Apostle declared the great truth, "Now are we the sons of God, and it doth not yet appear what we shall be." John E. 2. And the Lord Jesus left on record the commandment, "Call no man your father upon earth, for one is your Father, which is in heaven." Matt. XXIII. 9. If we are to reveal to you the Father, it is because we have followed the leadings of the Spirit until the Father has revealed himself unto us. But that revelation to our soul cannot become knowledge to you. We make the effort to reveal to you in words that which we have come to know as absolute truth, and you only obtain the knowledge of that truth by the knowledge of the Spirit. For as many as are led by the Spirit of God, they are the sons of God. Rom. V. 14. And the Son of God said, 1900 years ago, if I should say, I know him not, I shall be a liar like unto you. John v. 55. Therefore it behooves us to give you evidence from the scriptures of truth, which some of you hold dear. The very first utterance of the Old Testament is, in the beginning God, Elohim, created the heaven and the earth. The noun Elohim is in the plural form, and it would have been correct had the sentence been translated, in the beginning the gods created the heaven and the earth. Some authorities have ingeniously tried to evade the consequences of the plural noun in this case by explaining that it is a plural of excellence. Others hold that it signifies a plurality of attributes or manifestations, but the fact stands out incontrovertibly that throughout is meant a plurality of individuals, and when we reach the 26th verse, we read that Elohim said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness." The thought here is unquestionably that of a company of persons of whom one says to the others, "Let us do thus and so," it is not, "I will make." We are not, however, presenting to you a plurality of gods, but a God organized of many members, therefore one God. In the Hebrew, "let us make" is a verbal form in the plural, emphasizing the conception of plurality quite as much as is done in the English. We are thus brought face to face with language which images this picture to our minds. A plurality of gods, or personalities, if you please, deciding upon a concerted work that is to be accomplished, and working together as one body, one man, for the accomplishment of the work agreed upon. In the second chapter of Genesis begins the use of the name Yahweh, frequently in connection with that of the Elohim, Yahweh Elohim. In the consideration of the name Yahweh we have tried to present it as the embodiment of the idea of the universal spirit, the mind and will which is the source of all life, mind and action. Consequently, in the unity, of the two divine names, Yahweh Elohim, is brought to light throughout the scriptures, and in cases too numerous to mention, the conception of the final attainment of man being the unity of his mind and will with the mind and will of God. Reasoning along this line of thought we come to the following conclusion. Yahweh being the source of all life, of all mind, of all action, spirit, man in his creation must have been formed of the substance of Yahweh, as Yahweh is the source of all that is. And not only is he the cause of all energy, but his infinite mind is the source of all order, and in order there must be a purpose, for without a purpose mind is in discord. Therefore, when Elohim said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness," that declared purpose necessarily embodied the thought of taking of the Father and forming the Son. And, while we have no authority in the scriptures for the statement, we have reason to believe from what has been said that the Elohim are a body of men that, in the eons of time past, were created even as we have been created, and that, having developed through all the experiences of an earthly life, they attained to the unity of their mind and will with the mind and will of their Creator. And, as to the processes of evolution, development, there is no end, they have passed on in knowing the Father, Yahweh, becoming more and more like him, until they have reached heights of attainment so far beyond the possibility of our conception that they have become the creators, preservers and rulers, not of this earth alone, but probably of the whole solar system. Thus they have become the embodiment and expression of Yahweh, and have a right to be called Yahweh Elohim. And when they said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness," they expressed the thought that man, their creation, must pass through all the experiences of an earth life, as they themselves had done, and that, in order to go on in his attainment to that likeness, he must turn his thought and aspiration toward Yahweh, and seek with all his heart to be like him, in perfect harmony with the laws that gave him, man, existence, with the life of which he is the embodiment. When man has reached the point in his experience, where, through knowledge, he is able to give free expression to the life that animates him, he will awaken to the realization that he is the embodiment of Yahweh, and in his unity with the body that is to be formed, see chapter entitled, The Image of God, he becomes the image of Elohim. That is, as we shall have occasion to say further on, the image, spoken of by Elohim in general I. 26, was not that of one man, but of a plurality of men. As the Spirit said by the Apostle, speaking as by the Christ, "A body hast thou prepared for me, many members in one body, and all members in that body." See Rom. XII. Consequently, the revelation of Elohim in material and spiritual form must necessarily be found in the revelation of the ultimation of the expressed purpose to make man in his image and like him. The revelation of this ultimate is brought to light by John the Anointed, in his Apocalypse, chaps. IV, XIV, XXI, and XXII. One fact, however, is clearly manifest, which is this: all life is of the substance of God, and as Yahweh is one, the one in which not only we, but all that is, lives, moves and has its being. Therefore the life of man is the same life, on a lower plane, however, as that which animates Yahweh Elohim. Consequently, all are brethren. And, this being true, the Elohim, through the person of the Lord Christ, called himself our brother, and the mighty angel who gave the revelation to John and whose glory was so great that the beloved disciple fell down to worship him, said, See thou do it not. For I am thy fellow servant, and of thy brethren. While Elohim rightfully commands our highest love and admiration, and even veneration, yet our worship is of Yahweh. And in our prayers when we feel the need of help, the real need of something, we ask Yahweh Elohim as our elder brother when we have come to know him, to have some idea of the depth of his love, of the grandeur of his nature, the tenderness of his brooding care of us. We approach him with a confidence that is born of boundless love alone. We feel the absolute assurance that we shall always have that which we desire. For, while Elohim is so far beyond us and so incomprehensible to us, we must remember that we are his special care. No wonder that, by the prophet, he compared us to the apple of his eye, the strongest thought presentation possible. We know how sensitive the eye is, and how much more carefully we preserve it from injury than any other member of the body. Such, then, is the loving care and protection extended over us by Yahweh Elohim. When, through loving devotion to God, our true relation to him begins to be the individual experience, then we shall be given to know God. No longer through belief, no longer by faith, will we apprehend God, but we shall know the Father, and the Father will reveal himself to us as he does not to the world, reveal himself to us not merely in thought, but we shall see his form, feel his mighty power, hear his words, and be fed from the limitless fountains of his love. You who would have additional evidence from the scriptures relative to the truths presented in this chapter, we ask to follow the connection in which the word Elohim is used throughout the scriptures, and also its use in combination with the name Yahweh, Yahweh Elohim. We think enough has been said to give you a light to illumine your search in this direction. Some very satisfactory scriptural evidence as to the unity of the body of the Elohim has been given by Henry Proctor, MRAS, FRSL, in a paper which appeared in the American Antiquarian for January and February, 1905. We quote, When the great Moses Maimonides wrote the 13 articles of the Jewish faith which gave an absolute sense to the unity of the Godhead, which before had been understood in a compound sense, he departed altogether from the teaching of the Hebrew Bible on this point. For it is certain that the unity so strongly affirmed there can be nothing else than a compound unity. If we take these very words, which Jewish children are most carefully taught in order to guard them from believing in the Christian Trinity, viz. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Elohim Adonai Echad, *, we find that even here it is certainly a compound unity that is expressed by the word Echad. 1. For this word is derived from the root yahad, to unite, and occurs with a compound meaning, hundreds of times in the Tanakh, or Hebrew Bible, as in Numbers XIII. 23. A branch with one cluster of grapes, equals many grapes in one cluster, a compound unity. In Judges XX. 1, 8, 11, the congregation assembled as one man, all the people arose as one man, knit together as one man. In all these passages Echad denotes a compound unity, as also in Genesis E. 24, Basar Echad, one flesh. On the other hand, Yashad, which represents an absolute unity, as in Genesis XXII. 2, 12, 16, only son, Judges She, 34, only daughter, is never used to express the unity of God. And not only was Elohim used with a plural signification, but Yahweh, also, as in Genesis She. 7, and Yahweh said let us go down, and let us confound. And not only so, but the Messiah is distinctly affirmed to be the son of Yahweh in Psalms E. 2, 7, for in verse 7 he says to his Messiah, Beni Ada, my son, thou art. In Proverbs XXX. 4, his son is again mentioned. And the earlier books abound with narratives of the visits of Melech Yahweh, who is recognized as being himself, Yahweh, or as the Jews say, Adonai Elohim. In a fuller sense the term, Elohim, included not only the Son, the Messiah, but also the angels, for in the 82nd Psalm, the supreme God is closely distinguished as Elyon, the Most High, verses 6, and he is represented as standing in the congregation of the gods, and synagogue Theon, and charging the angelic rulers of this world, that is, Satan and his angels, with folly. Again in Psalm XCVII. 9, Kal Elohim, all the gods, are commanded to worship the Messiah. This is rendered from the Septuagint in Heb. I. 6, Pants Agiloi Theo, all the angels of God. In Psalm v. 5, a little lower than Elohim, is rendered, brachuti par angelis, a little lower than angels. So that in the fuller concept of the Godhead, the Melachim, or Agiloi, were included in one divine unity. So that the Christian idea of the Godhead is far nearer to that taught by Moses, and in the whole Hebrew Tanakh, than the Jewish conception of the present day. Delitzsch, in his Babel and Bible, says that the old North Semitic tribes who settled in Babylon, about BC 2500, worshipped Yahweh, the existing, enduring one, the one devoid of all change, and that this Yahweh was the spiritual possession of those same nomad tribes out of which, after 1,000 years, the Israelites were to emerge. This being, they called El, which means, the goal, to which the eyes of man looking heavenward are turned, on whom hangs the gaze of every man. From this he thought that the Hebrew idea of God was evolved. But this may be regarded as one evidence among many, of the existence of a primeval worship of El Elyon, the supreme God, which has been identified with the Elu Siru of the of Hammurabi. The biblical conception of God is sometimes stigmatized as anthropomorphic, but this objection is the outcome of ignorance, for although every appearance of celestial beings is described as being in the form of man, yet it is clear, also, that they believed in an omnipresent, all-pervading, all-sustaining spirit, corresponding to the teaching of Paul on Mars Hill, that he giveth to all life and breath in all things, for in him we live and move and have our being, and to that of John, that God is spirit, and that no man hath seen God at any time. So that the biblical conception of God is that of an all-pervading spirit, who is everywhere, fills all space, fills all things, is the life and intelligence of all things, and the motive power of all things, and that the Messiah and all his messengers are his offspring, genus, sons of the Most High, B'nai El Elyon, that all were called Elohim, but over them all the Messiah is supreme, and to him, as one with El Elyon, the worship of all is due. The thought presented in this chapter regarding Yahweh Elohim will meet with the strongest prejudice arising in the preconceived ideas of long-standing in the mind of the Christian world. Ideas which existed, as Professor Proctor says, among the early Semitic tribes. Because of constant touch with lower races who worship the sun, moon and stars and the various forces of nature as so many gods, the earliest Semitic thinkers were necessarily driven to the opposite extreme, and in order to preserve their people from leaving the worship of Yahweh Elohim and uniting with the heathen around them in their worship of many gods, they were forced to keep ever before the minds of the people that their God was not divided into many gods, one warring against another, as were those of the heathen, but that he was a unity, one God. Therefore, as far back as we have any knowledge of it, there have been repeated in the Israelitish ritual the words, "Hear, O Israel. Yahweh our God is one Yahweh," and also the words of the covenant, "Thou shalt have no other gods before me." Now, that the great truth of the multiplicity and unity of the Godhead was known to the writers of the Bible is shown in every utterance in reference to the great name and in reference to the Elohim, and even in this most emphatic utterance, Shema Yisrael Yahweh Elohim Yahweh Echad, Hear, O Israel. Yahweh thy God is one Yahweh, it will be seen that the noun Elohim, God, retains a plural form, and that also a plurality in unity is expressed by the word Echad. But it may be argued that this is not alone a Jewish doctrine, that it was also the doctrine of Christ. For, according to Mark's Gospel, when asked which was the first commandment, he quoted the same words in reply. It is remarkable, however, that, with the exception of Mark, none of the apostles give this form to his reply to the question. Not to question Mark's memory in regard to this matter, the Christ well knew that for many centuries it would be necessary to guard the people against the many gods of the heathen. And did he not well know the dark period through which his revelation must pass before the dawn of the eternal morning? Were this not true, he would not have told them that he had many things to tell them but that they were not ready to receive them then. Consequently, he made but little effort to reveal to his disciples the great mystery of the bringing together of a body of people and harmonizing them so that they become one body, many members, and all the members of that one body, all members essential to the constitution of that body. But he laid the foundation for this doctrine in the parable wherein he said, I am the vine, ye are the branches. Now, you that think, can readily discern the governing law manifest here. Through the vine flows the same life-giving sap that nourishes all the branches. Being a member of the body of Yahweh Elohim, he frequently emphasized the thought, I can of mine own self do nothing, which was equivalent to saying, severed from the body of the Elohim I have no power. In his last great prayer, John XVII, He prayed for those who should believe on him, that they might be one, as he and the Father were one. I in them, and thou in me, that they may be made perfect in one. Here in most unmistakable terms is expressed multiplicity in unity, not only in the body of his believers, but also in the body of the Elohim, which he called his Father. Bear in mind the words, that they may be one, even as we are one, in the same way. This is unmistakable language, but we will not extend the argument. While a multitude of texts might be quoted from the scripture to show that what has been said is indubitably a truth, we know how futile argument is, and realizing the force of the words of the Christ we rest these truths upon them. He that is of God heareth God's words. Footnotes 129. Asterisk, hear, O Israel, Yahweh, thine Elohim, is Yahweh one. 129. Genesis I. 26. 129. Genesis XVII. 8, 14. Exodus E. 2 et seq. 130. Job XXXVI. 25. 131. Biblia, June 1902. Vede, Code Hammurabi, and article, El Elyon, 131. Psalm chapter 139. 7-9. End of chapter 11. The Goal of Life or Science and Revelation. By H. E. Butler. Brought to you by Masonic Audiobook Library. Read by Kwame Agyare. Next. Chapter 12. The Eternal Order of Melchizedek.